The story took place in the early 2000s when my then boyfriend and I were in the process of renting an apartment together in northern Kentucky. Due to our credit history at the time, our options were limited to locations around the area that we were trying to stay in. We needed more space for when his 2 children came down to visit, since his daughter needed her own bedroom, and we wanted him to have an office to work remotely during the winter months whenever it got really bad on the roads to travel back and forth. We had just viewed the model apartment in this complex, and we had signed the paperwork for the 12-month lease. We were scheduled to do a walkthrough before moving in, and I had called him to tell him that I was running late, and I asked him if he could do it since I wasn't going to be able to get there in time since I had to pick up my son from daycare, and that I would miss my appointment completely by then. My then boyfriend reluctantly agreed and called me when he was on his way there, bitching that he had to deal with it after his long work day. We got off the phone when I had heard the apartment manager then greet him. For reference, the apartment manager was a small-framed man of maybe about 5 foot 6 inches, and he was a slightly balding blonde man who apparently had a big crush on my then boyfriend, hence my boyfriend's annoyed attitude. I had just gotten out of my son's daycare when I reached my car, and my phone was vibrating and lighting up like a Christmas tree. I looked down at the seat as I buckled my son and picked it up, as I then answered my then boyfriend. As I answered, my then boyfriend was huffing out the words,
"Where are you? Are you okay?"
I answered that I was still at the daycare. I heard a giant sigh of relief, then he said for me to meet him at the apartment office as soon as I could get there. When I got there, 2 cop cars were in the parking lot, and the cops were talking to both my then boyfriend and the apartment manager. Apparently what happened was when my then boyfriend had entered the apartment, he was in the doorway when another resident called over to the apartment manager with an issue in their apartment. As my then boyfriend was looking through the kitchen taking notes of things that still needed to be fixed, he thought he heard the shower running. He stopped what he was doing and he called out a hello. That's when a tall, dark-skinned man popped his head around the corner and then said,
"Yeah, just a minute."
Then the shower turned off completely. That's when my boyfriend went and turned the hallway light on and then saw the man rush into the doorway holding something. Luckily, my boyfriend was a big, tall man himself, because this must have scared the guy, who then bolted to the other side of the room, and my boyfriend then heard a loud thudding sound. Just then, the manager then came into the apartment. They both just looked at each other, shocked as hell, then ran to see the man dart back into the building through a side door leading to the basement storage area through the unlocked window that he jumped through. And since our apartment building was at the ground floor level, it was really easy for him to get away without hurting himself. The apartment manager and my boyfriend then bolted after him, and as they ran, the manager dialed 911 telling them to hurry, and they were chasing a burglar and he was armed. When the cops arrived, the man was gone. Apparently, he was a homeless man who had broken into a locked storage area by kicking in the door, and with the door busted, he could hide in the small area in the warm basement to sleep. They had found 2 pay stubs from nearby. It's ones where you get paid the same day. It was from a work temp agency with a name, and a few things that showed the guy had been staying there for 2 weeks at least. These storage areas were right by the washing machines and dryers that anyone in the apartments could use. The cops had figured that since he was staying there, he must have seen workers coming into our apartment painting, and that they must have left the windows open, because when they had checked out the apartment, the screen had been cut by a knife of some kind. When my boyfriend interrupted his shower, that was the only thing that saved him, because the police found a 6-inch knife of some kind in the storage area that he must have dropped when he went back in to get his things from there. Hearing all this from my boyfriend and the cops, we immediately decided to cancel our lease, and luckily the apartment manager was very understanding. We moved into another apartment not long after that in an area closer to where I worked at the time, and thankfully nothing like that ever happened. We've since parted ways, and I'm now living in a different state, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had been there with my 3-year-old son instead. I always check my windows and doors because of that, and I always tell my friends to never get a ground floor apartment. For some context, I'm a guy. This happened when I was 20. One night around 11:30 p.m., I was in my apartment in the apartment complex that I used to live in at the time, but not anymore. Anyway, I had just gotten out of the shower and dried off, and right after I'd put on my underwear and shirt on, I got a notification on my phone about somebody standing in my window. Yeah, I have a security camera hooked outside next to the window, and it's hooked up to my phone. Well, standing at the window was a guy who looked to be in his late 20s. I didn't recognize him at first, and I saw he was holding a gun. I freaked out, and then I put on my socks, shoes, and jackets and got the hell out of the apartment. I didn't want to waste too much time, so I didn't put my pants on before leaving. I then left my apartment. I immediately closed and locked my apartment door very quietly, and I ran like hell down the hallway, and I then went to one of the side doors since I didn't want to be seen by the guy. I got outside and ran as fast as I could to an abandoned building. The entire time I was running, I was continuously looking behind me to see if the guy was chasing me. The guy never was behind me, thankfully. When I got to the abandoned building, I called 911 and told them everything. I also told them where I was so they could come get me. Keep in mind that it was winter, so it was really cold then, and me being almost a mile away from my apartment outside really made me cold. About 10 minutes later, a police car arrived and I got in. I told the officer everything that happened, and he said he was going to go check it out. I then got into his car. When we arrived at the complex, I led him to my outside window around the corner, and the guy was still standing there. The officer then told the guy to step away with his hands up. The guy actually agreed, then he arrested him. I had approached the guy myself, getting a little closer. That's when I recognized him to be a former coworker of mine who got fired. I then explained to the officer that I used to work with the guy. I also have a video on my phone of him punching a female coworker in the face. The guy claimed that he wanted to come to my apartment to wait for me to open the curtains. Then he admitted that he was going to smash the window in and then kill me by shooting me in the head. Before he was taken away, he just went on with empty threats. I ended up going to the courthouse and I issued a restraining order against him so he can no longer approach me or contact me in any way, shape, or form. I haven't seen or heard from the guy since, and to the guy who wanted to shoot me, I really hope you're getting the help you need, and I hope you never do this again to anyone else. But yeah, that was quite an experience for me. I really hope to never go through that again. I wanted to share this story because it's been on my mind for a while, and I always wonder what happened, but I don't think I'll ever know. I live in a single-story, one-bedroom apartment, and each apartment building has 4 different units, 2 on one side and 2 at the other. My bedroom window faced the other apartment building. This apartment had a drunk on the left that sang and yelled at herself all the time, and an abusive boyfriend on the right that beats her every once in a while. The place I live in is filled with drug dealers, swingers, and generally just bad people all around. I mean, this place is kinda ghetto if you know what I mean. The story is about the abusive boyfriend. It started 7 years ago when I was in the bedroom playing a game on my computer, when I had started hearing screaming and yelling by both of them. This has been happening ever since I moved in, but this was way different. She started screaming for help, and you could hear what sounds like slaps. I called the cops and then they went over to the apartment. Then after they were done talking, I asked, well, what was going on? To which they just said, they're fine. Just call back if it happens again. A couple of days later, the girlfriend's mom comes to my door crying and asking, have you seen my daughter come out of the apartment lately? I can't find her anywhere. I just tell her no, and I then explain the situation to her. Apparently she knew all about this, and she said she kept telling her to leave him and come back home, but that she refused, and now I and the mom will never know what happened. All I can do is hope that she's still alive and leaves his ass. My name is Summer. My story happened about a year ago. I meant to send this sooner, but I'm quite lazy. I was 21 years old when this happened to me, and to give you an idea, I'm about 5'5" with a petite build, and I live in Indiana. The city that I live in is quite known to have a lot of crackheads, murder, SWAT team raids, you name it. It's a pretty dangerous place. One night I decided to invite my friend over that I hadn't seen since high school. The plan was to walk around downtown and find some of those electric scooters and just skate and smoke. It was about 10 p.m. when she showed up. It was also winter, so we bundled up and headed outside. To give you an idea, I live on a riverwalk. My apartment building has a security gate around the entire building, and outside of the gate is a long sidewalk that takes you under a bridge and to an ice skating park along with some restaurants. On one side of the sidewalk is a deep river, and then on the other side is all the buildings. Now, walking along this sidewalk, there are different sections of the bridge that you can pass over onto the other side. Anyways, we ended up walking down to the ice skating park, and we started smoking a J. We noticed a cop car driving by us. Weed isn't exactly legal where I live, so we did our best to act nonchalant as if the J was a cigarette. The cop actually didn't even seem to notice or care, and just kept driving. My friend and I felt a big relief, but had I known what was coming next, I would have gladly gotten the back seat of the squad car. As we continued to walk around on the riverwalk by the skating rink smoking our J, I had started to get the sense that someone was outside too. To avoid looking like a paranoid freak infant of my friend, I nonchalantly looked over my shoulder when I had noticed a man walking behind us. He was maybe about 5'10", white, skinny with brown hair, dressed in jeans and a hoodie. His hoodie was up on his head, even though it was 10 p.m. and it wasn't raining or snowing. He had his hands in his pocket, and most importantly, I'll never forget his thick, perky-looking mustache. I don't know, just thinking about his mustache always gives me pedo vibes. He was probably late 30s or early 40s. Freaked out now, I hadn't said anything to my friend yet, just continued to talk to her about our careers. I could still hear her talk, but I was only listening to the sounds behind me. That's when all of a sudden, he blurts out with an easygoing voice.
Hey, does one of you have a cigarette I can butt off you?
I'm assuming he thought our J was a cig. Even still, as soon as he did speak to us, I instantly got mad and scared. My mother always told me that you don't have to be nice to strangers. You don't even have to answer. Just walk or run away. Remembering what my mother said, I just replied back with, "No!" very bluntly and angrily. However, my friend very kindly just said, "No, sorry, we don't have any cigarettes." All through this conversation, we had never stopped walking, and we continued keeping our distance. I think we both knew if we gave him the opportunity to come close to us, it would definitely be game over. After telling him no, we continued to walk, and he just said,
"Oh, okay,"
and made his body language like, "Oh, I tried asking my questions and it was a no. I'll try somewhere else for a cig." Except he didn't stop there. He continued to follow us and he asked us again,
"Do you know where I can get some free Wi-Fi?"
Instantly, I'm pissed again. Just because he should know better than to try and walk and talk to two little petite girls alone at night. But because right across the river is a glowing yellow McDonald's sign, any idiot can see the sign and know to get there. So now I'm 100% positive he's up to no good. I responded, "No," more bluntly and more angrily. But of course, my kind friend had said, "No, I'm sorry, but there's a McDonald's right over there." And again, he just said,
"Oh, okay,"
and made it very clear with his body language.
"If they have no Wi-Fi, I'll leave then. Sorry for bothering you."
As we're walking, I had 911 on speed dial in my pocket now. I had no weapons on me, so I improvised in putting my keys between my fingers. I'm still checking over my shoulder, making sure that he's not trying to get closer to us, all while trying to plan an escape in case he starts charging us. Right next to us, we just passed the bridge to get to the side with the McDonald's that he made it apparent he was going to walk across the bridge and depart from us. At this point, it's absolutely crucial that I make the right decision to start planning my escape. The route we take up is along the sidewalk, and we have to get to the street and cross over and run to the other side of the street where my apartment is. That, or I go under the bridge and run up to my apartment. I definitely didn't choose under the bridge. So we started to walk up the hill, and I still check behind me, and I'll never forget this image. He's standing maybe 30 feet from me, and he's standing under a tree, hood up and all, still as could be. But his eyes were piercing right through my soul with the most menacing look I've ever seen. We turned the corner, and I then faintly said, "Run!" We're running for our lives at this point, and my dumbass friend stops in the middle of the street, out of breath, and she tells me that she can't run anymore. This damn girl. I couldn't believe it. A psycho's following us wanting God knows what, and she can't make it across the street. My weed is good, but it's not surrender to a killer good. I could literally see my security gate. We just had to make it another 20 feet. But I look back at the corner we ran from, and now he's running too. I snatched my friend by her hood, and I dragged her with me. We finally made it inside my gate, and I latched it shut. We're rummaging through my pockets to grab the key fob that opens the side door to the building, and then all panic sets in. The door reads my key fob, and my friend and I push ourselves inside. Just as the side door shuts, the crazy mustache man then appears and slams into the gate. I couldn't hear him through the glass door, but he looked like he was chuckling. I was so freaked out that I didn't even take the elevator. I just bolted for the stairs and ran up to the third, and I then slammed into my apartment grasping for air while telling my boyfriend everything that happened. I never walk outside on the riverwalk anymore. I truly have no idea what would have happened to us if we even stopped to answer his questions. Or worse, if I hadn't noticed him walking behind us in the first place. It gives me the chills not knowing what could have happened to us. Why was he laughing? What was he even doing out there? Regardless, I'm very thankful nothing violent happened to us. My name is Clea, and when I was living in California, I had a scary stalker. Josh was well known for slipping roofies in girls' drinks at bars and then watching what happened for his own entertainment. There was a night where my friends were DJing and go-go dancing and a bunch of us got roofied. I don't remember anything from that night other than my friends taking me back to their house to make sure nothing happened to me. I lost most of my stuff, but thankfully not my keys, wallet, or phone. I woke up at 3 a.m. at my friend's and then threw up for the rest of the night. Josh was also known for posing as a photographer on Craigslist, and a friend who we'll call Allie fell for it when she moved to LA and was in need for money. This guy drugged her, took her clothes off, and took nudes of her while she was unconscious. Later on, he would go to her music page on Facebook and then post the nudes repeatedly in the middle of the night. Her mods had to stay up deleting everything over and over again. This was before you could block people from pages. He's also sexually assaulted many girls in his life. He has charges for assault and battery and domestic violence. Well, at some point, he decided he would stalk me and then threatened to drug me on social media. I tried to file a police report, and just like every other girl that has filed reports against him, the police either talk them out of filing or just flat out refuse and say they can't do anything. At one point, there was actually a petition to get him locked in prison for all the druggings and assaults because of him. He was somehow getting 6 months worth of Xanax, and he would sell it around Hollywood Boulevard even after he was on probation. His lawyer somehow got all of his felonies expunged from his record, and now he's working as a psychiatrist. The only reason he even got that degree is to help him manipulate people, including the legal system. He always puts on the good guy act before his true colors come out. He began showing up at private events I was at without even being invited, and he's not friends with any of the people there. All he'd do is drink his drink while staring at me before leaving, and would later find a way to contact me as I was waiting for a taxi. His messages were usually like,
I see you down the street. It really makes me so sad that you won't talk to me.
I ended up getting a taser because he just wouldn't leave me alone, and he started making death threats to my friends. He would frequently show up outside my apartment building in the middle of the night, and the security guard kept catching him before he'd run off. My guess is he was trying to figure out how to climb into my balcony and then break into my apartment. LAPD refused to do anything to get him to leave me alone. The stalking and harassment continued for another 5 years or so. This guy is 40, and a couple of years ago he drugged a minor, filmed himself having sex with her, and then actually uploaded it to Pornhub while claiming it was his girlfriend. He also dated a barely legal porn star, and he got her hooked so bad on meth that she took her own life. True story. Somehow he's allowed to own weapons, and his probation officer didn't even do anything about the reports of drug usage and sales. I just don't get it. Josh, I hope we never meet again, and I really hope that you never drug, stalk, harass, or assault any other young girls. My husband and I moved into an apartment in 2019 after I found out I was pregnant with our daughter. We had lived in a duplex in a bad neighborhood for a few months before that. We had never had any issues with that place, but I wanted to get out because I grew up being taught that the city this neighborhood was in was just bad all around. Anyway, I chose an apartment complex in the city I grew up in. It's a place that I'm familiar with, as one of my cousins lived there before. Our unit ended up being on the 3rd floor. Not something I wanted, but it was the only 2-bedroom available at the time. So we move in, and things are going great for that first year. I had our daughter and got adjusted to life as a first-time mom. I honestly don't know when we first met Greg. This is the man's real name because I really don't care if people know it. It's a standard name anyway. He lived across the hall from us. He's in his late 50s and lives with his sister, something that I always thought was really odd. It was immediately obvious to me that this guy had something wrong with him, something off mentally. It was in the way that he conducted himself. I told my husband early on that something wasn't right with Greg. When my husband would ask why, I couldn't pinpoint it. Now, Greg hadn't exactly come off as rude, harsh, obnoxious, or anything that you would expect from a troublesome person. He was insidious, and that's far worse. Over time, I would pick up on small things about Greg. He talked to everyone, but he mostly talked to younger women. Women my age, 30s or younger, and when he did, he talked to them for a long time, somehow always making it where it was awkward or difficult for the person to exit the conversation without being rude. I was one of these women, and I was extremely uncomfortable every time. Again, it wasn't in what was said, it was in how Greg conducted himself. Little things like blocking the only exit to the laundry room so that I didn't have a way to get out while we talked, or somehow always conveniently being out in the hallway when I was leaving with my daughter. There were times where Greg would start a conversation with my husband in the hallway as he was coming home from work, but then the man would follow my husband into our apartment to continue the conversation. I was so mad that this happened, and I gave my husband a look, hoping he'd catch on and do something about it. But again, Greg somehow made it to where it would have been rude to do so. Looking back on it now, I should have just been a complete banshee toward Greg and made him leave. I mean, come on. Who the hell just walks into someone's place uninvited like that? The fateful day came about a month or so before we were moving out. The complex had gotten new owners, and we weren't sure how high the rent would be hiked. We could have asked, but I really just wanted to move away from Greg. It had gotten to the point where I would double check the peephole just to make sure I didn't see him out in the hall before leaving the apartment. On this particular day, I had to work, and I was in a bathrobe about to get ready, when there was a knock at the door. It was Greg. He came barging in, uninvited again, and he said he needs our help. Thank God my husband was home at the time, otherwise I would have been really uncomfortable beyond words. When asked what he needed help with, Greg explained that he had been talking to a woman online and that she had asked him for money. When he said that he didn't have any more money to give, she threatened to post pictures to his family's Facebook, showing what he had been doing with her. I guess they had been exchanging pictures of a certain nature with each other. I'm sure you can figure out what kind. We were baffled as to why he would be so worried about this. Clearly, this was some sort of scam, and if his family did see the pictures, it would probably just make the woman look crazy. I told him to just block her and to not talk to her anymore. He said that he didn't know how, and he handed me his phone so I could do it for him. Of course, the first thing I see in the conversation is not a part of Greg that I'd ever want to see. I mean, ever. But the next thing I saw made me feel even more sick. This woman he was talking to actually looked like a teenage girl. I was immediately furious, and I showed my husband, who then asked Greg how old this girl was. We could both tell that Greg was instantly nervous, which then told me all I needed to know. His answer? I thought she looked like she was 30. Gross. First of all, the man is old enough to be the father of a 30-year-old. And second, the way he answered that question made it seem like he actually knew her true age and didn't want to fess up to it. At this point, I had to actually finish getting ready for work, so I went to the bedroom to change while my husband continued the conversation, basically telling Greg that he needs to be careful online and that sort of behavior is nothing but trouble. I think my husband was really trying not to believe that Greg was talking to a young girl. My husband also gave him a lecture about, well, adult content that can be found online, and that not all of it is actually adult women. I heard Greg then say, "So does that mean I should get rid of the stuff in my room?" I don't know what kind of stuff Greg had, nor do I want to know. I really wanted to report him to the police as a potential pedo, but I don't know for sure if that girl he was talking to really was underage or not. And I don't know if the police would have taken that situation seriously. We've had run-ins with internet crime before with scammers, and when we reported those to the police, they pretty much said they couldn't do anything about it. Sorry if this was long-winded, but that day validated the gut feeling I had for the 3 years we were living there. I'm really glad that we've since moved out, and I haven't had to deal with Greg since. Maybe he isn't a pedo, but he's most definitely a creep that I don't want my daughter to ever be around. Better safe than sorry. I'm a 24-year-old female who's currently sharing an apartment with my 24-year-old female best friend. We'll call her Sherry. Sherry has a furry black cat named Kane. He's pretty large and dense, as he's a Maine Coon mixed breed. Kane usually spends his time doing normal cat stuff. He prefers to sleep in Sherry's room, but every so often he'll get curious about mine and want inside. Whenever Sherry isn't home, Kane actually prefers to be in my room. So I'm going to recall the first incident that happened. Sherry works night shift, so it's not uncommon for me to spend the evenings alone. However, this particular evening, she was working a day shift and was expected to be home around 11 p.m. It was only my boyfriend and I at the apartment at the time, and we decided to get ready for bed and spend some intimate time together, if you know what I mean. The current time was probably around 9:30, so I knew Sherry would be arriving home soon. Therefore, I left Kane outside of my room and pulled my bedroom door shut. He seemingly had no issue with this. My bedroom door has a pretty solid latch once pulled shut. The draft from the AC also pulls the door shut if it's left cracked. My point being, I know 100% that my bedroom door was definitely shut and that the latch had caught, meaning unless you turned the doorknob, you wouldn't be able to open the door. So fast forward about 20 minutes, and I heard my bedroom door open and then shut. I heard the distinct sound of the inside latch, but because my boyfriend and I were preoccupied with each other, we thought that we had just mistaken the noise for something else. About 10 minutes later, we're still hearing some meowing, but we finish up and then get up to rinse off. When we got up to head to our shower, I peeked my head out of my bedroom to see if Sherry was home yet. She wasn't. As I opened my door though, Kane speedily ran from under my bed and out of my bedroom door to the living room. I was confused to say the least, and I saw Kane on the other side of my door when I shut him out of it. How did he get inside? And then I remembered hearing the sound of my bedroom door opening again. Now I was convinced Sherry was home. I checked our apartment and her location, and sure enough, she wasn't home. I also have a Ring camera that would have alerted me if someone entered my apartment. My boyfriend was obviously confused too, but he just assumed that Kane may have been hiding under the bed the entire time. Which, don't get me wrong, could be a possibility. But the thing is, I know that I shut him out from the bedroom, and I also heard and confirmed that the latch shut, and I heard the clicking of my door opening and shutting. I might add it was a quick open and close as well. Like within 2 seconds I heard the distinct closing sound. Anyway, I decided to just sweep this occurrence under the rug, as nothing like this had ever happened before. Well, flash forward a few weeks to present time. The story actually happened last night, which was October 30th, 2023 as of the time of this story. Sherry and I had just finished a test in the morning, and by the time we arrived at our apartment, we were dog tired. Sherry was waiting on her own company to arrive, who we'll call Dale, before she went to lie down. Once Dale arrived, I then took off to my bedroom to nap. It was probably about 1 p.m. Sherry, Dale, and Kane remained on the couch. I fell asleep pretty awkwardly. I was laying on my stomach diagonally across the mattress. I remember a few interesting blips from my dreams during my nap, and I slept pretty hard, until I heard my door open and the sound of Sherry and Dale's voices. Now, I'm extremely tired, so I opted to keep my body still and eyes shut so that they just assume I'm still sleeping and leave me alone. My mind and consciousness are very awake though. I then felt Kane hop onto my bed and walk around and on the top of the backs of my legs. I even moved my legs around him a bit so that he could find a comfy spot to lay with me. This went on for a couple of minutes until I eventually felt and heard Kane hop off my bed and I distinctly remember Sherry then saying, "Oh my gosh, she's knocked out, look," and then Dale replying, "Oh, I don't know. I don't want to look at her sleeping. That's kind of weird," along with the two of them giggling to each other playfully. Then my door shut. After my nap, I got dressed to go run some errands, and I noticed that Sherry and Dale were sleeping in Sherry's room, assuming they wanted to nap also. Sherry always leaves her bedroom door cracked as to allow Kane easy access in and out. I ran my errands, and when I arrived home later on, Sherry, Dale, and I all had dinner together. The conversation was really lively and fun, and I decided it would be funny to try and make a joke out of them letting Kane into my room during my nap. They both fell silent and looked very confused, which also confused me. I told them that I heard them talking and what they were saying while they let Kane into my room. Sherry finally speaks up and then says, I'm not sure what you're talking about. We went to nap right after you went to nap. We never got up. Kane slept with us the entire time. We never opened your door. I mean, why would we?" I was absolutely bewildered now because she was right. Sherry never just opens my door. I responded, "Oh, I assumed Kane might have been meowing or throwing a fit to get into my room, and so you opened my door to let him in. I felt him on me, walking on me and around me." Sherry kept denying any of this happening, as well as Dale. They were both becoming increasingly concerned because I kept describing the details. It was crazy. I heard every sound. I felt every movement, especially on a mattress where movement depresses the material. I know it was real. It had to be. They're both excusing it as some sort of lucid dream I had, but I just can't get over it. I have no idea how this happened or can happen. All I know is this makes two weirdly freaky incidents that have happened to me in the month and a half of living there. I would really love some feedback from anyone else who may have experienced something similar. I guess I'll just be waiting to see what else happens. My name is Noel. I'm 24 and living with my roommate and bestie of about 10 years. We're currently living in our first apartment post-graduation. This is the story of our crazy neighbor who genuinely made us fear for our safety. I'm still amazed and furious that more wasn't done to stop his atrocious behavior. For clarity, here's the cast we're dealing with. The crazy neighbor is Chris. I'm using his real name because, well, I believe that he deserves to be shamed. Roommate is A, girlfriend is going to be G, and Chris's daughter will be N. I'd say it was about 3 months into A and I finally moving in together that Chris, his girlfriend G, and their baby girl N moved into the apartment below us. Chris was a maintenance worker for our apartment complex, and though I never met G, Chris seemed nice enough at the time. I made N some cookies, and Chris had asked how our day had been, and would even help us out with small things like when I knocked out my window screen and couldn't get it back in on my own. Sadly though, it didn't take long for Chris's true colors to show. A came into my room one morning kind of panicking a bit. She had showed me a video of Chris and G. They had been fighting, and A had caught a video of Chris coming from the apartment as G was getting in her car, where Chris had suddenly chucked his Xbox at G and then ran to try and break her car door as she drove away. I immediately told A to send the video to the apartment managers. To our fury, the management insisted that it was an internal affair. So A and I angrily demanded that the management ban him from our apartment for our safety. We didn't feel comfortable with him being in our house anymore, and we avoided him like the plague. We started hearing him and G arguing more and more, and N sobbing. Finally, we saw G and N leave, and we were then greeted to the regular sounds of Chris punching his walls and screaming at himself. We recorded everything to show his increasing violence. G would come every once in a while for N to spend time with her dad. This would usually result in the two fighting or having extremely loud, angry sex in his room, literally to the point that A and I could hear it through the entire apartment. It was a few weeks before everything hit its peak. A was at work, and I had the day off. Our cat and I were falling asleep on the couch when my cat woke me up by jumping down. I paused to try and hear what we heard, and we heard lots of banging and shouting. Going to my room, I could hear G and N screaming and sobbing while Chris had cussed and threw things. I shakily tried to record the sounds while I grabbed my bat from my closet, and I then called A and my parents who lived down the road. Then I called 911. I took as much video as I could, and eventually, A came home. As she did, Chris and G went outside, with G sobbing that he hit her. We recorded it, and we assured her that we had called the police, while Chris cussed at us under his breath. After G left, A and I called our partners to come as well, and A tried to calm me down because I was sobbing and panicking. My parents came, and my dad, who was like a linebacker and built like a truck, actually stood guard by the door and on our porch. Literally the second the cops had arrived, Chris immediately tried to play happy family right in front of the cops, playing with N along the sidewalk while being super passive-aggressive about my dad standing on our porch, glaring at him like a hawk. It took all that I had not to take my bat to the side of his stupid-ass face for insulting my beloved father and hitting poor G. Note, I don't think G was the nicest person, but she never deserved to be treated so horribly by Chris. The cops had asked A and I for our statements, and we showed them everything from that day and told them how Chris had been increasingly violent over the past month. As we went back to our apartment after giving the cops our info, we could see Chris's door cracked just enough for him to stick his head out and glare. It sent chills up my spine. A and I sat with my parents trying to calm down and watching through our Ring camera to see what was happening. After about 10 minutes, we could suddenly smell weed through our door, and we heard Chris pounding on the living room walls while N wailed. Just as he started pounding, a cop came to his door, and we then saw Chris get taken away in cuffs. We were so relieved, thinking it was over. We were so wrong though. Chris was gone for 2 blissful days when A had texted me that he had come back. I was pretty much panicked all night at work, shaking and nauseous. Chris was back in his apartment without G or N. We only ever saw G coming back once in a blue moon to sleep with Chris, and we often saw Chris coming home with this one random girl who couldn't have been older than A and I to drink and have sex. We were also greeted to the sounds of Chris screaming and punching on the walls and slamming on our ceiling over every little sound that we made. Chris also had to drive a stupid little golf cart to work, and he would often walk around to hide and smoke weed if he wasn't practically hotboxing both of our apartments. Each time he saw us in our apartment, he would always glare at us like our existence was a personal insult, like to the point that he almost drove or walked into other people and things. Our neighbors saw this often. We also got a video of him making a big annoying show in front of our Ring camera just to antagonize us. He was also so disgusting. We regularly got roaches in our own apartment. No matter how many times we talked to management, they did nothing. The poor assistant manager heard about this often, and he always tried his best to help us, but to no avail. The last week he was there, he had the same young girl over with one of her friends. They got trashed and were in the same room under mine, screaming and laughing until like 3 a.m. I heard them through my earplugs and white noise I played. I gave a single stop to shut him up, but Chris responded by screaming louder than I've ever heard, and then pounding repeatedly on the ceiling to the point that I was crying from fear that he'd come to our door. My work has left me drained, apathetic, and severely depressed. So having to deal with this pathetic psycho was like a cherry on the mountain of shit that was really becoming my life. Very recently, on one of the worst days of my working career, I came home to find that Chris's car was gone, and I peeked into the apartment to see that he had completely moved out. I raced upstairs to A, and we screamed with joy, in actual tears, running downstairs to look into the apartment at the trash, the destroyed carpet, and all of the holes in the walls as well. He has also definitely been fired, as we don't see him at all in the complex. We often still laugh about how much it probably cost the manager and Chris to fix the apartment. We now have a very lovely downstairs neighbor, a Puerto Rican grandma and her adult grandkids who are so nice, and that we've already warned about the office's incompetence. Hopefully though, they won't ever have to deal with what we did. In conclusion, I have a message for Chris. Get thoroughly fucked. I really hope your life is shit, and you never get to see G or N ever again, and that every woman in your life sees you for the pathetic man baby that you are. I hope you rot in hell, along with every other abuser out there. One summer day, when I was about 4 or 5, and my older brother that was 6 or 7 wanted to go swimming, my mom had a friend named Jessica who lived in these apartments that had an in-ground swimming pool. So my mom's friend made the suggestion that we go swimming at our apartment's pool. So we got ready, and we went down to the pool. Now, I don't want to sound racist, but we were the only white people there. Not that this was a problem, because everyone was having a good time. I'm just mentioning it. My brother was in a pool in a canoe float, and this lady was pushing him towards the deep end of the pool, and he didn't have floaties on. Meanwhile, my mom, Jessica, and myself were outside of the pool, and my mom begins to tell the lady, "Hey, quit pushing my son. He doesn't have any floaties on, and you're pushing him down to the deep end. He's going to fall off if you don't stop." The lady then replied back with, "So? What are you gonna do about it?" This really set my mom off, and she then replied back with, "What am I gonna do about it? I'll show you if you don't stop." So in order to protect my brother from drowning, my mom then gets into the pool in the shallow end and works her way towards this lady that is trying to push my brother off the float, when she then gets pulled back by 3 men. Then later on after this incident, we were then told that those 3 men were her uncles. So they drag her in the pool back down to the shallow end, while one man has her left arm, and another man has her right arm. And then there's also one in the back of her, and they begin pushing her underwater and holding her there. She felt like she was underwater for over 5 minutes, but in reality, it was only a few seconds. Then they would lift her up, letting her get just a little bit of breath, and then dunk her right back under the water for more. They would repeat this process several times over. While this was all happening, I remember screaming and crying. And as I was crying, there was another black man that came up to me, separate from this other group that had my mom. He had asked me what's wrong, as if he didn't even see what these men were doing to my mom. I felt like he was being sarcastic, but because I was so desperate for help, I had asked this man anyway. "That's my mom. Can you please help her?" The man actually replied no, saying that he wasn't getting involved. But then right then, just as I thought my mom was about to die, they finally let her go. Totally out of breath, we left the pool and we went up to Jessica's apartment to call the police, but they never did find the guys that did this to her. Everyone ended up being okay, but my brother and I can't remember how we got away from them and how we all left at the same time from the pool area. Even though this happened, I want everyone to know that I didn't become racist because of it, but I just didn't understand why all those people just sat by and watched it happen and didn't even try to help us. It's just really insane to me. This happened when I was 22. One late night, I was spending the night with my friend Heather. We were at the apartment in the apartment complex she lived in at the time. For privacy reasons, I'm not saying where this happened or when it happened. We had had a couple of drinks, and we did a group video chat with our boyfriends. And then after about 25 minutes, we hung up and fell asleep. Well, here's where it gets terrifying. At about 1:30 in the morning, Heather and I were woken up to the sound of a high-pitched whistle, like one of those whistles a coach uses during a sport. Heather said it was the fire alarm, and we both started to smell smoke, so we knew right away what we thought it was. We then heard a guy screaming in the hallway.
Evacuate the building immediately. There's a fire in the neighboring hallway.
Heather and I got the hell out of the apartment, and we went to go check the hallway the guy was mentioning. And sure enough, the hallway was fully engulfed. The fire was huge, and there was smoke smothered all around the top floor, and we could definitely feel the heat when we went to go check it out. We, along with everyone else in the building, ran down the stairs and out the main door, and the smoke spread to the main floor as well, except that the main floor wasn't as smothered. After we got outside, everyone was crowded in the parking lot. The fire department had the fire under control within about an hour. They then put box fans in all of the hallways and everywhere else in the building to get all of the smoke out. The fire alarms were turned off when the fire was put out. There was so much smoke in the building, and we had to wait outside for another 3 hours before it was finally safe to go back inside. Once we were finally able to go back inside, Heather and I went inside to look at the damage. The hallway was burned to a crisp, and it was a total loss. Everyone living in that hallway was displaced, and they had to find new places to live. Thankfully, there was no damage to Heather's apartment, since it was in another hallway, but we couldn't get back to sleep for the whole rest of that night. Later that morning, I called my mom and I explained to her everything that happened. She was terrified, but she was also glad that I was alright. Both my mom and Heather's mom came over to Heather's apartment a few minutes later. They pulled us into their arms, and we were all crying so hard. We were all just really glad that we weren't hurt. They said that we were really lucky that we weren't hurt, and that Heather's apartment wasn't burned. We found out that the cause of the fire was faulty wiring, and to this day, it still gives me nightmares. To start off, I was 10 years old at the time, And back then, my grandparents used to own a whole apartment complex, and the leasing office was attached to our house in the complex. So this is where I spent most of my childhood. My grandmother would run the office, and my grandfather would do all of the physical labor along with the other workers. I spent most of my time in the complex riding my bike, walking my Jack Russell, playing in the creeks behind the trees. You know, normal kid stuff. Nothing crazy. I always felt safe around there, and everyone knew me as the owner's grandchild. Certain parts of these memories get a little foggy as I get older, so I can't remember every incident, but I remember enough to know this man. Something just wasn't right with him. When my grandmother first leased the apartment to this guy, I never even knew until I actually met him. The first time I met him, I was walking around the complex, doing nothing in particular but minding my business, and I see him. He approaches me, and he begins to make small talk, and me being friendly, always spoke back. He mentioned how he just moved in, and how his apartment is super cool, and he doesn't mind if me and my friends ever want to come over. I didn't think anything of it at the time, and agreed. But things just started to progress the more I'd see him around, and eventually, I knew something wasn't right. The next time I met him, I was walking around the entrance of the apartment complex. And to add, Mercer County Community College was right behind the apartment complex. So I used to travel over there, and you could cut through the college by the entrance of the apartments. I was only over there because the overhead bridge that looks down into the creek was there, and I used to enjoy peeking over and seeing the fish swim around. Well, once I was done looking, I turned around, and there he was, right in the walkthrough of the apartments in the college. He's peeing into the bushes. He turns towards me, exposing himself, and he then apologizes for me seeing him like this. Of course, as a 10-year-old child, your brain doesn't normally process things as easily. So I told him it was okay and walked away. He just stood there, reminding me about the apartment, and that was the end of it. I went home. Now he started getting really creepy, because the last two encounters I very clearly remember were the final straw to it all, and little 10-year-old me started realizing this wasn't okay. I was walking my dog Buddy one day, and he sees me yet again and approaches me. He asked if he could pet the dog. I was hesitant but agreed because my dog's very friendly. He crouched down to pet him, and then his penis fell out the side of his shorts. And this was when I realized that he wasn't okay. He sat there petting my dog while also groping himself very visibly for me to see. I was appalled by this. I honestly didn't know what to even do, and alarms were raising in my head. I just stared at what he was doing as he asked me what I like to do and if I'd like to come over and play games with him. I just told him, yeah, maybe one day, and I told him I better get going so I can finish walking the dog. This was the final encounter. I had my best friend who was 10 at the time and my sister who was 3 at the time over at the house with me, and we decided to take the dog for a walk. He was fun to walk with, very hyper, and would drag you if you let him. We were walking in the backyard of some of the apartments, and lo and behold, this guy appears, almost like he knew we were there, like he was watching us. He began to casually talk, complimenting my dog and asking us if we wanted to see his dog. My little sister agreed and walked a little closer as he then pulled out his phone. I was honestly fooled for a second, and I thought maybe he really does have a dog. He crouched down next to my sister, and it started showing photos. And as I got closer, I realized that he was showing nude photos of him and, well, what he referred to as dick as his dog. I then realized that he was yet again groping himself, and had also exposed himself through his shorts again. He was way too close to my baby sister for comfort, and it made me very uncomfortable. He could have snatched her and ran with her if he really wanted to, and I always think about that. I was in a state of shock as I realized he was inviting us over again. My best friend realized this was creepy as well, and we just exchanged looks. I knew that I needed to get us out of there. So I bent down to pet my dog, and I clipped his leash, knowing he'd dart away at an intense speed. And he did just as I planned. We yelled that the dog's loose, grabbed my sister, and noped the fuck out of there. And I left the guy there exactly where he remained, just staring. We ran home in tears, telling my grandfather everything I experienced since the first day he moved in. I felt really horrible knowing that I let it escalate so long to the point that others around me were also exposed to it. The cops were called, and he was arrested on the spot, and we had to tell everything that happened to child investigators, cops, and the news. It was a lot. After he was gone, reality really set in, and so did the trauma. I swear that dog saved us and got us out of there, and I really miss him every day, because if I didn't have him, I wouldn't have even known what to do. I just think more so about what would have happened if I had fell for going into his apartment, or even worse, if he got his hands on a child that was 10 times more gullible than me. The fucked up part is that he was only in jail for the weekend until his family bonded him out. Okay, so I wanted to give a little update. The guy is actually still alive, unfortunately. He moved to the next state over to Pennsylvania, and his address and phone number are public. Apparently he's a mechanic now as well. Yeah, it's really unfortunate that this sick fuck is still breathing. For context, I'm a woman living alone in my apartment that's located on the ground floor, so my balcony is very visible for others to see. Like every night, I work at 4 a.m., so I leave at around 3:40. Unfortunately, in France, they decided to turn the lights off from 10 p.m. to like 6 a.m., I think. But thankfully for me, the landlord where I live turned the lights on just for me from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. It's very dim, but I'm still thankful for it. On this one Thursday night, I leave like always. I go in my car, lock it, turn on my lights, and something catches my eye. So I looked up and I thought it was just a cat jumping from my balcony, because they love to come by and just look around and leave. But it wasn't a cat. It was a man standing next to my balcony. I think that the light surprised him. I'm then looking at him, and I see him walk away from me on the grass, but he can't leave that way. So I'm now just staring at him scared and crying, not knowing what to do for like 10 seconds. But then I can see movement again, and it's him walking towards me. Very quickly, I just continue walking to the main road like nothing happened. He takes one last look at me in my car before I then lose sight of him. Also, he's wearing black sweatpants and a camo jacket. I really don't know what he was doing here. If he was sleeping on my plastic sofa on my balcony or what. But I just can't stop thinking about his face looking at me, or what could have happened if it was pitch black outside. I just don't know. I wanted to make a report to the police, but they said they can't because there's no damage. The landlord lady also told me, no, maybe it wasn't for you. Maybe he was looking around for a dwelling. At this hour and in that kind of outfit? Yeah, I don't think so, I said. She then replied back with, no, I'm talking like a robbery. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Ever since this night, I always carry pepper spray, and I run to my car instead of walking. I also bought a surveillance camera for my balcony just to check before going out at night, because I'm just super paranoid, and I feel like I'm developing OCD, as I have to look and check outside before going to sleep. Update. This is 3 months after everything else I just mentioned. Since then, for my own security and comfort, I've decided to buy another surveillance camera. The position is perfect, and I can move the camera from my phone even if I'm not home. This is where it starts getting even weirder though. So the first time I saw someone was the 4th of May at 3:40 a.m. In June, nothing happened, so I thought maybe it was just a one-time thing, like wrong place, wrong time. Well, on the 4th of July, I'm getting ready around 3 a.m., and 20 minutes later, I see a notification from the camera on my phone. I didn't get nervous because sometimes my camera just captures bugs or spiders. But oh boy, did my heart skip a beat. I opened the notification, and the video started. I saw a man walking straight next to my balcony, and he's hiding his face. I actually froze for like 5 minutes, and I decided to call the cops because I didn't know if he was still here, because the cameras didn't send any notifications after that. The cops came, but he wasn't there anymore. I was really weirded out by that situation. Okay, so now we're at the 23rd of August. Third time's a charm, right? I left for work at 3:45 a.m. Yes, precisely. While I was driving, I get a notification at 3:47 a.m. It's again the same dude from July. He's hiding his face, but I can recognize his gait. I called the cops right away, and we met at my place. I was crying and explaining that this wasn't the first time this happened, and that I didn't feel safe, and that I just couldn't understand why this was happening. The male cops were totally minimizing the whole situation, and it got me so pissed because they could see I was confused and scared, but they just kept saying not to worry, that maybe the guy's not even here for me. I don't care. It's 3 a.m. and it's dark outside, and a random dude is close to my place. Anyway, they couldn't do anything because again, there were no damages. I decided to lay down a handrail just in case, even though I know I can't do anything. I'm still really nervous every night when I go to work, and I still carry my pepper spray with me just in case. I also have really great neighbors all around me that have kind of helped me out in some ways. But I just don't know why he's here, and why the fuck in the middle of the night. I just have no idea. But I really hope he doesn't harm me, or that he has any other sinister plans. I'm really uneasy about the encounter I just had. Any insight would be so much appreciated. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I live in a large multi-building apartment complex, so there's a lot of neighbors I've never met or seen before. I stopped to pet a cat who roams around the complex while I was taking out the trash, and I then see a man out there who's in his mid-30s to 40s, and he approaches me. He says hello, and he asks how I am. I say hello back, and I ask him the same, to which he then replies back with, "Oh, you know, trying to survive this dark and brutal world that we live in." So I'm uncomfortably like, yeah. No alarm signaled at this point, but then he goes, "So how's that blue beetle you drive?" And I'm then immediately feeling creeped out, given that I've never met or even seen this man before. Then he asks if I enjoy being a college student at the college I attend. At this point, I'm really creeped out. And I then say to him, "How would you know that?" To which he then laughs and then says back to me, "Well, come on, it's obvious." He then begins warning me about how the world is malicious and just how cruel people are. He says to not trust anyone and to always watch my back because you really never know what people will do, especially in this area. I try to wrap it up and I tell him to have a good night, and he then tries asking for my specific unit and for my name. I deflect, once again telling him bye, and I rush to leave. As soon as I got inside, I actually started crying and shaking because I've never had such a bad gut feeling about a person like that. I'm alone now, and I feel beyond creeped out. His only conversation points were casually mentioning information that a stranger shouldn't know, as well as warnings regarding the cruelty of mankind. So altogether, it almost felt like an indirect threat. Please, any outside perspectives on this interaction would be really appreciated. Do I need to worry about this guy? In 2015 to 2016, I had moved to Florida from California to go to college. I was around 18 at the time. I was staying in a small studio by myself pretty far from university, but also close enough to where my apartment was the hangout spot. To paint you a picture of how it looked, it was the shape of a rectangle, but with only one window. So you walk in and it's the living area. Then there's the kitchen, then the bathroom, with the closets on the right side of the wall. One particular night, I had about 6 friends over at my apartment. So it was 4 guys and 3 girls in total, including me. We were all partaking in illegal activities, drinking, smoking, etc., but we were all under 21. So when I got a knock on my door, I thought it was a neighbor about to complain either about the smell or the noise. I checked the peephole, and I saw a lady, whom I instantly recognized as a panhandler that's always at the corner street of my apartment complex. So I opened the door, and I asked her if I could help her out with anything. She had a towel over her shoulder, and then said, "Hi, I've been going around door to door, but everyone keeps turning me away. I was wondering if I could please just take a shower. I promise, I don't want anything else. I just want to clean myself." Now, I know any sane person would have said no and told her to keep it moving, but I was a dumb 18-year-old empath that was high as balls and also panicking in the moment. So I said yes. As I walked her into my bathroom, I told her how to turn on the water and where the soap was, then walked out. The look of pure terror on my friends' faces was priceless. All at once, they started asking why I had done such a thing, and that if I realized just how dangerous this situation could be. Was there someone waiting for her outside? Did she have a gun? Was she gonna rob us? One of them even went to the kitchen to grab all the knives, and then just hid them just in case she tried anything. We were all so quiet, just anxiously waiting for her to finish up the shower. And then when she was done, she came out of the restroom, and I walked her to the door. "May God bless you," she said, and I never saw her again, not even at the corner. I guess you could say what I did was stupid, but I think good karma will come for me one day, or at least I hope so. This happened on the night of my little sister's 18th birthday. It was me, her, and our older brother and someone else. We were going on the north side of Chicago to go to a strip club. Our brother found a parking spot and then told us that we can just go in while he's taking a piss. We decided not to go though and just wait for him. While we waited for him, my sister was passing out edibles. Our brother reunited with the group, and my sister then gave him the last piece. We had started to walk to the strip club when we then heard a car coming out of an alley pulling up behind us. He yelled out to us,
Yo, what are y'all doing here?
I already knew what was going to go down just by that question alone. We all ignored him and just continued walking. Then he yelled out another question.
Hey, y'all know C?
And he asked us twice. I then whispered to my brother that my gun was in the car. Literally as soon as I said that, the dude in the car started shooting at us. As we were running, my brother tripped and then got right back up. I turned on a busy street and I had seen the other person follow me. As I made a glance, I had seen my sister kept straight into a darker block. I instantly got scared for her. As I kept running, I had seen my brother across the street running in the same direction that I'm running. We ran right past the police. I felt like I was being followed and I just kept running. The person behind me had told me to stop, but I ignored them. I saw a Walgreens and I told her we can go there. We went in the store and I'm waiting on my brother, but he never came. I then called my sister to see if she was good. She ended up going to an alley and had seen a Chinese worker and she had tried to get help, but he had shooed her away. I told her where we were, that we were at the Walgreens. I then called my brother to see if he too was okay. Well, he ended up going to the strip club, then telling security what happened. They eventually came to the Walgreens to get us, and I felt like we were being watched. There was a whole lot of people looking at us. The police ended up escorting us to my brother's car, and I was really worried that his car was broken into and my gun was taken. We got to the car and then got home. I was holding my gun in my hands throughout the whole ride. Thank God we never actually got hurt and nothing else happened. But still, that was a really scary experience. So, a little background info. After my 8th grade year, my family had moved from Chicago to Arizona. I was a bit of a chunky kid due to childhood trauma, but that's a story for another time. My freshman year, I'd become anorexic. I had stopped eating and focused on my PE classes. If I ever did eat, it was crackers and a Snapple, and it actually resulted in me dropping a lot of weight. The lovely family I had didn't notice that I wasn't eating, but it really praised me for losing weight, which resulted in my mother buying me a new wardrobe for summer, which consisted of tank tops, mini skirts, tube tops, you get the point. So now for the story. I go home to visit my grandma and other family every summer during high school who still live in Chicago. This took place the summer right before my sophomore year, so I was about 15. Puberty had hit hard, and of course men took notice. I had an on-again, off-again relationship with a guy I dated since I was little, who was a little controlling, picking out my clothes and trying to say whatever I could wear and couldn't wear, etc. But at my young age, I didn't feel like I had a choice. I mean, he was my first love. One day I'm headed around the corner to a restaurant called Maxwell's. Keep in mind, my grandmother lives on the south side of Chicago, which can be a little violent, but I was used to it, and it felt like home. I get to the restaurant and place my order at the counter, and there's this guy standing off to the side staring at me. Now, this place isn't a typical restaurant. It has 2 doors right across from each other. When you walk in, there's a long counter to your right with thick plexiglass about 2 inches thick to protect against gunshots, and then the door across from you that you can exit. Anyway, this guy's staring at me after I place my order. I'm trying my best to avoid eye contact. As a 15-year-old girl who's 5'3" and 130 pounds, I figured it would be best to stick to the one side of the room until my order was fully ready. He slides over and then says,
Hey, what's up? What's your name?
I look up and I stupidly give him my first name. He says that his name is Eric, and he continues to stare. Me feeling awkward, I'm just like, okay, cool. He says he's 28 and he asked how old I am. I tell him I'm 15, and he immediately flips a switch and calls me a liar. I tell him I'm not, that I'm in high school just visiting my family from another state. He got really close to me and right in my face. His breath smelled of stale cigarettes. I slide back instinctively right against the wall, trying to make eye contact with the other guys behind the glass. They notice I'm uncomfortable, but they don't say anything. He repeats that I'm lying, and that if I didn't want to talk to him, I should have just said so. Right at that time, my order came up. I grabbed my food and then ran outside the door. I could hear his footsteps from behind me. I try to cut through the alley because I know I can hit my boyfriend's backyard before I could get back to my grandmother's. The guy's still behind me, yelling my name and calling me all types of names. Unknowingly, my boyfriend, being the guy who he was, had watched me walk to the restaurant, and he was actually keeping an eye on me, and he saw the whole situation I was in, then stepped forward. The guy backed off and then headed back towards the restaurant. Of course, my boyfriend blamed me, insisted that I was leading the guy on or flirted in some way. I know better now, and I'm no longer in that same relationship. But I will admit, it was the one time I was grateful that he was keeping an eye out on me. I would say that I live in one of the most unsafe cities in the US, that being Chicago. Although the south side where I live has a lot of crime, I live in a community that consists of a lot of police officers and firemen, so I have the luxury of not being constantly concerned for my safety. From time to time, people wander in from the surrounding less safe neighborhoods to rob or rough up some kids, but it's far and few between. For reference, I live in a really small house that I rent. I, a 21-year-old female, along with my 2 younger sisters and my mom, live here alone. Occasionally, I'll have my boyfriend over, but it's rare that men enter our house, and we have no dog. Around April, my mom tells me that her and my sister had seen a man walking up and down my block with a black hood up, and that I should be on the lookout. My mom grew up in one of the bad neighborhoods of Chicago, and as a result, she's often paranoid about dumb stuff, so I just ignored it. The next day, I pull up to the front of my house, and I see a man in a black hood standing next to my neighbor's garbage cans. I can't see his face, but he has a bigger build and around average height. He had a bag with him, and you can tell he was just trying to seem normal. As soon as I saw him, I got a huge sinking feeling in my stomach, and I felt nervous. Luckily, my boyfriend was with me, and he started to briskly walk away as we were exiting the car. I tell my mom, and she gets even more freaked out. In his rush to leave, this man left the bag that he had with him. As I looked inside, I could see a bunch of snacks, some half-eaten and some unopened. This creeped me out. What was this guy doing? Eating snacks and watching my family? Fast forward a couple of hours, and it's dark now. My mom is thoroughly paranoid, so she keeps looking out the window just to make sure that this guy isn't creeping around anymore. At about 8, I hear her scream for my boyfriend, and I look out the window. We come running over, and we look out to see the black hood guy across the street staring directly at our house. He has his hands deep in his pockets, and he's clearly looking into the house. My mom calls 311, which is the non-emergency number, to then report it. As the cops pull up, the man walks fast down the alley. I figured that an innocent person would just stay and talk to the police, and the fact that he keeps hiding his face and running when people see him now has sufficiently scared me. As the night goes on, we continue to see this man walking or staring into our house. We keep calling the police to report it, and every time they show up, he evades their questioning by walking or running away. This goes on until 2 a.m., and the police eventually tell us they'll just keep circling. So the next day, we see the same man walking around our house again and staring into our house. At some point, the neighbors start to notice as well, and they also call the police. After a week of this, the guy stopped coming around. I am so thankful for our neighbors who made him feel watched and therefore finally leave us alone. Now I'm always worried whenever I come home late at night or that he may be following me. After all, the hood had prevented me from ever seeing his face. For all I know, he might be following me in a public area and I have no idea. All I can say is that he's definitely made me more hyper aware of my surroundings. This happened when I was only 5 years old, so most of the information I gathered was through my parents. I lived in a middle-class neighborhood in Chicago in a 2-bedroom apartment with my parents. The apartment building was gated, and you needed a passcode in order to enter through the front. The backside of the building, however, was open and led to the alleyway where residents could throw out their trash, which is common in Chicago. My upstairs neighbor was a woman around 40 years old who had lived alone with her cats. Yeah, I know, a cliche, but she was a sweet lady. One time she went on vacation and asked my parents if they could feed her cats, and she left them a key. While she was away, my dad tried to enter her home to feed her cats. However, the keyhole just wouldn't budge. My dad felt bad, but he couldn't get in to feed them until the lady came back from her vacation. My father was really apologetic for not being able to feed them, but the lady nonetheless understood, and she even offered to show my dad how to turn the keyhole, as she went on vacation often and needed someone to tend to her cats. So my parents kept the key on the key hook. My mother worked a 9 to 5, and my dad worked night shifts in order to not have to leave me with a babysitter. My mother and I often stayed up and watched Friends together. I swear this is where my love for the show developed. Anyway, one night as usual, my dad was off at work working his usual night shift, and my mother and I were up at night watching our show. While the show played, my mother recounted hearing footsteps upstairs, but not the usual set of footsteps followed by the patter of the kitty's paw steps. No, this was multiple footsteps and muffled talking. My mother didn't hear any screaming, just heard some music playing. As this was a Saturday night, my mother just thought the lady upstairs had company over and didn't think anything of it. Well, Sunday came and went, and on Monday my mom decided to call off for some reason or another. We were all laying on my parents' king-size bed when we had heard a knock on the door around 11 a.m. My dad opened the door to 2 police officers and a woman who was the upstairs lady's friend. The police, along with a friend, had explained to my parents that the lady had failed to show up to work, which wasn't like her at all, and that she wasn't answering her phone or her door. The police officer asked if my parents had seen or heard from her, but my parents said no. My dad had then remembered that he had a key, and he even offered it to the police officer. My dad then joined the 2 police officers and the lady's friend. When the police officer went to put the key in the keyhole, it wouldn't turn, so my dad jumped in and showed them how to open it. According to my dad, the 2 police officers gave each other a strange look, but continued to enter the apartment as the friend and my father then followed. They were then greeted by the cats, but there didn't seem to be anything out of place. That is, until they reached the room at the very end. When they walked in, they found the lady with a pillow over her face, blood-stained clothing from what looked like stab wounds. The friend cried out hysterically, but she was held back by an officer and my father as to not taint the scene. The other police officer began to call in the wellness check turned murder scene. As more police, forensics, and detectives showed up at the scene, my parents were questioned separately. My dad was asked to go down to the station for further questioning. He tells me now that it was because he became a suspect since he had a key and knew how to open the door. This was also important because there was no sign of forced entry. When they were able to corroborate his alibi, they let him go. A week had passed and my parents were able to gather information from the police. They said that the woman's debit card was used at an ATM where they were able to obtain a picture of the man, and they released the image to the public to see if they would get a hit on it. Apparently, a kindergartner had told her teacher that her dad was on TV, and this somehow led to her father being detained and charged along with 3 of his friends with the murder and rape of this poor lady. What still rocks me to the core is what follows. When they questioned the men, they confessed and they told the police everything. They told a story about how for a few weeks they watched a young Latina woman with her curly-haired daughter studying them. They knew that when the father went off to work, that the daughter and mother were all alone in the apartment. They studied the building for a few weeks, and they knew that the backside was open and led directly to the back doors of each apartment. They concocted a plan to break in to do God knows what to my mother and I. That night had finally come when they knew that my father had left. They were waiting at our back door when they heard someone coming down the steps with a trash bag. It was the lady. She had apparently locked eyes with them and knew right away that something was off, and then turned to run back to her apartment. She unfortunately wasn't quick enough. That's when they then grabbed her and pushed her through her back door while muffling her screams. She stood no chance, and I shiver at the thought of what that poor woman suffered through, and how easily that could have been my mother and I. It still gives me chills to this day. This happened a while ago. I had downloaded Tinder begrudgingly just to try it out. I'd rather meet someone organically in my real life, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to try a dating app, especially because my friend met her longtime partner on there. Anyways, I had matched with a girl who I'll call R. Our first conversation took place on the Sunday evening, and I went to sleep at about 10:30 p.m. And on the next day, I went straight to the gym and work. When I looked at my phone around lunch, I had noticed I had a notification from Tinder. It was from R, and she had sent me a couple of long messages telling me very personal stuff. The last message read, "Did I scare you off?" I had sent a voice note to my friend, asking if I was simply being paranoid or was that a little red flag. I mean, it just felt a little clingy. I decided to respond, and I explained that I was in work, and I responded to her messages. We only spoke for a week, but throughout the week there were several red flags that I ignored. I felt like I was being paranoid, but looking back, I really don't think I was. She kept talking about her ex, and she was constantly complimenting me. She had asked for my phone number after one day, and I said no. She was upset about this, but I told her that we had to talk some more before I felt comfortable doing that. She then said, "Well, ask me anything," whenever I explained that I needed to get to know her better. Looking back, I feel like this might have been her way of trying to get my number quicker, if that makes sense. I guess now is a good time to mention that I'm a girl too. R then told me that she was from another country and that she moved here due to her parents being homophobic. She told me that she had no relationship with her mom, which becomes relevant later. As our conversations progressed, she had started to get overly flirty, constantly telling me that I was beautiful, the most beautiful girl in the world, and so on. Her location was only 1 hour away according to her profile. She was always talking about her ex, and honestly, it just never felt right to speak with her. But again, I thought I was being too judgmental, and I kept talking to her anyway. By day 5, she had asked for my number yet again, and I gave it to her. She messaged me right away and told me, "I really hope you don't regret giving me your number," which is pretty eerie looking back. The day after I gave her my number, she had asked if she could ask me something. I said sure, and she asked when she could take me on a date. I told her that I wasn't sure. She started to guilt me, saying we'd been talking for a while and that we had to meet sometime soon. Honestly, the thought of meeting her just felt wrong. Something always just felt slightly off. I ended up saying that if we met, it would have to be a Saturday. And suddenly she had us going on a date that Saturday coming. She told me we should get coffee and go for a walk, which I agreed to. Part of me felt kinda weird about it all, but I thought I was being silly. Looking back, I now realize I cared way too much about seeming paranoid. My entire body was screaming at me to run away because I knew something was off deep down. But you live and you learn. I'm still a young girl, so I guess it's normal to make dumb decisions sometimes. Anyways, she insisted on driving to where I live to have a date with me. She told me it was 2 hours away despite her profile having her as 1 hour away. I told her I'd rather meet halfway, but she insisted on coming right to where I live. She didn't know my address, and she suddenly told me that she was going to come over to my house after our coffee. I was taken aback, and I told her she couldn't come to my house because I didn't feel alright with that. This next part makes me cringe to type out, and I can assure you that I cringed just as much when I read it. She then said, "When I fuck you, it has to be at your house. I share a bed with my mom right now." I was immediately put off. I don't care what other people do, but for me, her saying that and being so pushy was just really unattractive. Sex is a big deal to me, and I just got such awful vibes from this girl. It was almost like she was telling me we would have sex, which also put me off. Anyways, well, we're talking on this social networking app called WhatsApp, and for anyone unfamiliar, you can read a message on there without opening it by clicking the notification in the notification panel of your phone in a certain way. So I did that, and I don't actually know what made me do it. Usually I would click on her message right away, but this time I looked at it without even clicking on it. The moment I clicked on it, she'd know I'd seen it. I immediately called my best friend and then told her everything. She had been telling me for a while that I wasn't being paranoid, and that if I felt something was off, then it was. She then burst out laughing when I told her about the weird sex comment, purely out of discomfort and shock, plus the obvious cringiness of it. Another thing though, the comment about sharing a bed with her mom freaked me out. I don't care how bad it sounds. It just seemed weird as hell to share a bed with your mom at her age. I mean, she was in her mid-20s, and also she had told me that she didn't even speak to her mom. She said that she lived alone here, and that her mom lived in her home country and they didn't speak due to her mom hating her for being a lesbian. So she had obviously lied. Plus, I just felt like it was weird that she was sharing a bed with her mom, and everything just boiled over in my mind, and I suddenly realized I was so stupid for talking to her. As I was talking to my friend, she had also messaged me to tell me that she smacked her aunt. And basically she told me she hit her, but it was a joke, and that I'd never have to worry about her hitting me. That freaked me out too. My friend then told me to just ghost her, and that's what I did. I blocked her phone number and then blocked her on WhatsApp. So the next morning I woke up, and she had messaged me from another number telling me that she didn't know what she did to me. My friends all said this was odd, but I felt really bad because I know that ghosting is bad and immature. After 5 days had passed, I decided to unblock her and message her to clear the air. I just felt like I had to be mature and tell her my issue with her instead of just ghosting her. So I then messaged her and I introduced who I was, and I told her that I wanted to tell her why I ghosted her. She replied telling me to explain myself, and I did. She then replied, saying, "First of all, I'm never violent with women in my life because I'm not aggressive, and I get on top of my aunt to fight her because it's a joke." Then she said that I clearly had issues and it was ridiculous that I didn't want to meet her because I apparently need to meet people sometime, and she wasn't moving too fast. It was just me moving too slow. Then she said, "I only asked you on a date, not to marry me, and it wasn't just for sex." But she ignored the fact that she invited herself to my house and then told me that she was going to apparently fuck me. She also said that she wasn't using me for sex, but that sex isn't a big deal, and she didn't see the point in waiting around since she liked me. This pissed me off again. This expectation and the fact that she would be telling me what we would be doing instead of actually being engaged with me and making sure that I wanted to be intimate with her. It was just fucking weird and so creepy and desperate. She then told me that I was just like her toxic ex who had cheated on her for 2 years. Then she said, "I stayed because I'm such a loyal person." So basically calling me toxic because I didn't want to fuck her after she invited herself to my house. I ended up getting so mad, but I realized there was no point in arguing. I'd done the mature thing by saying my piece, and there was no point in saying anything else. So I then replied that I wouldn't message her again, and she replied later telling me not to be hard on myself. I blocked her again, and that was it. All I know is I feel like I dodged the biggest bullet in the world. Now, I don't know if this story is any good because it really might suck, and it might not be that scary. But I guess it shows the importance of listening to your gut instincts and to never explain it away or downplay it. You aren't being paranoid, and if something feels off, it definitely is. It's usually a red flag if someone's acting desperate and wanting to meet you right away, and also not caring about your boundaries. There was a lot of weird things about R, and I'm honestly just glad that I never met her, because if this was just her messaging, who knows how she would have been in person. Stay safe, everyone. A few years ago when I was 21, I was on a date with a guy that I had met on a dating app. I'm the type of person who wants to really get to know people. So when I was on the apps, I would prefer to meet up sooner rather than later just to see if the sparks are flying. Our first date was in a restaurant. It wasn't anything posh, but it wasn't a fast food joint either. I'll call my date Calvin. He seemed like a regular guy in our chats. He cracked a lot of jokes, but it was never inappropriate, so I didn't get a red flag. He was polite too, and he seemed like a regular guy. However, I quickly realized upon meeting in person that I'd been mistaken. Calvin was trying too hard with the jokes, and he started to be off-putting. I arrived 5 minutes early, and he was there waiting for me, all fine and nice. When he greeted me, he had tried to fist pump me. When we said hello, he then laughed that he was really glad I was hot in real life. I cringed a little, but I tried not to be judgmental. Our conversation went downhill and fast. He cracked jokes about literally everything I said. I told him about my job, and he had made a sexist joke about how he was shocked that a woman was smart enough for it. I made a face and was about to answer him back, but he made yet another sexist joke. I was eventually able to tell him that he wasn't funny and this wasn't the way to woo me, but he just made more jokes. I remember thinking, yeah, this is gonna be a long night. I was hungry though, so I decided to just sit it out. I mean, it couldn't be that bad, could it? Well, it was. I tried to ask him questions, but he just continued cracking jokes, and he wouldn't be serious at all. He also told me that he loved pranks, and he went on and on about how he loved to pull pranks. At one point, he had asked me how many sexual partners I'd had, and he informed me, "You don't look like the type of girl to put out easily." And then he laughed like a hyena when he said this. I then told him that this wasn't appropriate to ask on a first date with someone that he didn't really know. You guessed it. More jokes. He was disrespectful and he mocked my food choice, mocked my drink choice, then asked me if I was getting a dessert after my main meal. Then he made a joke about how I'd ruin my figure if I stuffed my face. I was fed up by this point, and I just wanted to get away. I didn't have dessert. Not because of his little smart-ass comments, but because I just wanted to go home. I was so done with this absolute clown. When we left the restaurant, I had turned to him and I said I was going home, but that I was glad we met and got to know each other. I said that last part in a way where it wasn't suggested that I liked him. Hopefully that makes sense. He asked how I was getting home, and I said I was going to walk. It wasn't far, and it wasn't extremely late at night, and I felt safe doing the walk. It was bright, and I felt fine. Calvin said how he wanted to walk me, but I just said no, it's okay. He continued to insist, however, and it was annoying me. I even began walking after saying no thanks, and he started to follow me. I felt really annoyed and awkward, but I just continued walking. I eventually had an idea, and then said, "Fine, you can walk me up to my street." He grinned, and he was even excited about it. He continued to annoy me, and I tried to acknowledge his existence every so often to be polite, whilst also being careful to not lead him on. Now, I wasn't about to let Calvin walk me to my place. I decided I'd lie about where I lived, then dash home without him. My plan seemed to work, as when I was about 5 minutes away, I walked into the wrong street and then stood at the bottom of the road. I told him this was it, and that I was going home now. He told me that it was great to walk me home, and that he enjoyed himself. I grimaced and then said goodbye. He gave me a hug, and it was incredibly awkward. My arms were pinned to my sides. He pulled away and then smiled at me, then turned away and started to walk away. I waited until he was fully out of sight before dashing off into the correct street. I then walked slower to my house as it came into view. I was sighing to myself and thinking about how shit that date was, how I was going to tell him right away this isn't going to work, how I was unmatching him, etc. I got to my front door and got my key out. I unlocked my front door, and as I put the key in the lock, I had heard footsteps dashing up behind me. I unlocked the door and then had this feeling of horror and panic, like I've got to get into my house right now. I didn't even turn around, but it was too late. I then felt arms wrap around me and then push me into the door. I was pinned like sideways, if that makes any sense. Just in my doorway, front door wide open, and I felt breath on my earlobes. A voice then whispered, "You didn't want me to see where you really live, did you?" I thought, this is it. I'm going to be raped and murdered by a psycho. Just as quickly as the arms had wrapped around me, they let me go, and I was then met with hooting and cackling laughter from behind me. I spun around in panic, then saw Calvin standing illuminated by the streetlights outside. In that moment, I had felt a mix of things: fear, panic, uneasiness, and total rage. I stammered out "What the hell?" and he continued laughing. I stood there in shock and anger as reality then sunk in. Calvin finally calmed down enough to tell me that he knew that I didn't live where I'd claimed, that he knew I wasn't filling the date, and that he thought he'd pull a prank to make me laugh. He just kept saying, "I thought you'd find it funny," when I ended up erupting on him. I then shouted at him that it wasn't fucking funny to creep on a woman, follow her home, and then grab her from behind and whispering menacing words in her ear. I was so fucking angry. I couldn't believe how clueless and careless this total son of a dick was. I told him to get off my property and to just leave me alone. He seriously acted like he couldn't understand what the big deal was. I was so angry and I felt so shaken up by this. I was even angrier that this idiot had gotten to me so deeply. I told him to leave, and he did. I slammed the door and locked it, and immediately unmatched and blocked him. I praised myself for not having exchanged numbers with him or any other social media. I immediately called my mom and best friend to then tell them about what the hell had just went down. They were just as mad and horrified as I was. I was of course relieved beyond words that nothing bad had happened to me, but it was really terrifying in that moment. So to any men listening, don't do this shit. It isn't funny. Women have a real fear of men following us and trying to harm us sexually and physically. These pranks will never be funny, and I refuse to believe Calvin was really that dense that he didn't know exactly the fear he was instilling in me. I wonder if he wanted to punish me or something. It really unnerved me to know that he knew where I lived. That night I had the house to myself because my roommates were out. I really hated being home alone after that, and I was so hypervigilant and very paranoid afterwards. I was glad to move out a few years later into my own place, and if Calvin ever happens to hear this, all I have to say is fuck you. I hope I never see your sorry ass ever again. When I was 19, I started dating. For context, I'm a girl. I met a guy through Facebook dating. It was a friend of a friend of a friend situation. His name was Scott, and he was tall with brown hair and tattoos on his right arm and hand. He seemed normal over our messages, so we had decided to meet up at our local coffee shop. I live in a fairly big city, but it wouldn't be busy where we met. It was nearly afternoon, and he was right on time. He went in for a hug when we met, but it felt natural. We got our coffees and a snack, and it settled down to chat. We were seated at a nice big window, and I felt warm and fuzzy. Scott was 21, and he was more muscular in person than I'd initially realized, but that didn't bother me. I've never cared about body type much. He was wearing a tight t-shirt, and I felt like he was trying to draw attention to his arms. I had asked about his tattoos, and instead of telling me the meaning behind them, he had asked me if I'd like to touch them. I stroked one of them and then complimented it again. He started being a bit weird from here on out. He started flexing his arm, and in my head I was just thinking, what? I thought he was nervous, but when I moved my hand away, he actually grabbed it and put it back on his arm. I then stared at him and tried to pull away. He held my hand on his arm and then said, "You like how strong I am?" I mulled over on what to say, going through a list of possibilities. Do I cause a scene? Do I stay calm? What the fuck was he up to? I tried to keep my voice calm but firm, and I told him to let go of my hand. He did, and he started laughing. It was an uncanny laugh, like he was some alien or something. It was so fake. I then took a drink of my coffee, and it was suddenly very awkward. He kept grinning at me, and I just felt uncomfortable and weirded out. I tried to ask about his tattoos yet again, but he just wouldn't tell me about them. Maybe there really was no backstory, but I assumed there would be. He started talking about how he loved the gym, and I said that I could tell, and sort of laughed to keep everything light and breezy. He then started to say that he loves being strong and loves working out. Nothing wrong with that at all, but I was still weirded out at having him held my hand down like that. When he stopped talking, he had asked what I thought about his muscles, and I just said something like, "Yeah, it's cool that you have a hobby you enjoy." He got all serious and he asked again if I liked them. I decided to just say yes, and he smiled at me. He said good, and then it was his turn to take a drink. I felt really weirded out now, and I was starting to really wish the time to pass so that I could just leave. Wishing that I had some button to do that thing in the movies where someone phones you and then you pretend you need to leave for an unforeseen circumstance. I decided to steer the conversation to something else entirely, but he wouldn't budge. He stared at me and he told me that he was really into having girls worship his muscles, like this was a bedroom activity that he liked. Now, I don't think there's anything bad about that, but he was acting really weird prior to this, and it's the first time we'd met. Not really first date shitter in my opinion. I was unsure of what to do. I feigned interest, asking how he learned that about himself. Big mistake. When he finished telling me way too much intimate information, I excused myself and I said I needed to use the toilet. I took my bag with me, and he noticed but didn't care. I then went into the bathroom and called my mom, asking her what to do. She told me to be honest and just tell him that I wasn't feeling it and to leave, but I was scared to look rude. Chronic people-pleasing tendencies at this age. I don't know how long I was in the bathroom, but it was definitely too long. I ended up deciding that I'd fake being unwell. I came back out and he was facing in my direction, like he'd watched the bathrooms the entire time. I decided that I'd rather embarrass myself and get out of this shitty date than just be assertive and risk being rude. So I told him I had an upset stomach and I really needed to go. I lied and I said I was lactose intolerant and they must have put in the wrong milk in my drink. He had to have known I was full of shit. Excuse the unintentional irony. Still though, he acted like he believed me and we walked out. He then walked me to my bus stop and he even went in for a kiss, which I swerved. As soon as I was on the bus, I blocked him. I avoided the friends of friends of friends who knew of him from there on out. I know this story isn't the most pearl-clutching, spine-tingling horror story in the world, but there's some pretty unsettling thing about how you think someone is normal after chatting to them, and then underneath the surface is a whole world of weird. His behavior was very weird. He was obsessed with his own muscles and got way too sexual way too quick. Red flags galore. This happened to me years ago when I was a new nurse. I was in my 20s and I had started working in an old folks' home. We had a resident who I'll call Bob. I didn't have an opinion of him because he really kept to himself. He just seemed like a regular old man. He was in his 70s and he had several health problems, but he seemed happy and normal. One day it was just him and I had to give him his medication. He had a photo album in his lap, and he was grinning at the photos. Now, I always made conversation with the residents, and I'd had normal chit-chat with Bob before. I asked him if he was reminiscing, and he looked up at me and said yes. I asked him if he missed his family, as I noticed that he never had visitors. He kept smiling, and he told me that his friends were his family, and they're all gone now. Our conversation went on, and when I was about to leave, he asked if I would like to see his photo album. I of course agreed, but what Bob showed me made me feel sick. The photo album was one of those flip ones, where it's a row of plastic files that you slip a photo in, so you can see several at once, if that makes sense. Well, the photos were of naked women, and they were clearly in distress. They were bleeding, and they looked like they'd been beaten up. Pain and humiliation was etched all over their faces. They were bound and gagged in disgusting poses. One woman in particular, it actually felt like she was staring right at me, like she was really in front of me and pleading for help. The look in their eyes is what still gets under my skin. I felt sick. My blood literally ran cold. I didn't know what to say. I knew Bob couldn't hurt me because he was too weak and old. But I had also had this thought that if I reacted in a certain way, he'd get off on it. It was like in that moment, I just realized he was a sick, deeply disturbed, perverted man. Bob stared at my face, obviously waiting for a reaction that I didn't give. It felt like hours had passed, but it was probably less than a minute or two. He looked away from me and back to the photos, holding the album like he was presenting a priceless artwork. He smiled at the photos, and he told me in a wistful voice that he used to be in a biker gang, and that those women were the stock. He said that him and his friends could fuck them whenever they wanted. I must admit, in that moment I felt like knocking Bob out, but I knew that I had to remain calm, and something told me he would get off on it if I started shouting at him. Instead of doing something, I just left the room without a word. I didn't know what to do. I still had other medications to give out, so I finished that first. I then took a minute to myself, and I thought that if I was a smoker, now would be the perfect time to light one up. I was angry and numb after Bob's revelation. Whether a story was true or not, he clearly loved hating women to have those photos in an album. I decided to tell a higher up, and they checked Bob's room. They never found the album, but I know what I saw. I didn't imagine it or dream it. It was 100% real. I have no idea what Bob did with the album or the photos, but he must have known I'd report the incident. He must have stashed them somewhere. I just don't know how. They didn't search until later the next morning at like 10 a.m., so I suppose he had time to hide them somewhere. I continued giving Bob his meds, and he never acted differently, but I was always very reserved towards him after that. Those photos still trouble me to this day, and I believe they'll haunt me forever. I wonder how many of those girls are missing today. Are they even alive? Was he a kidnapper, or was he a murderer? I just don't know. I've heard stories of gang members using women like objects and sexually abusing them, but I don't know much about it. It's a fucked up world we live in. I try not to think about it too much, but memories like this have a way of rearing their head occasionally. I wonder why Bob showed me. Did he want to relive his past and thought showing me and making me freak out would be fun? What would have happened if I had started shouting at him? These are answers I'll never have. Although if Bob were here to answer some of my questions, I know it wouldn't be enough, because I'll never understand how someone can be so twisted and depraved like that. At the end of the day, all I can really do is pray for the women in those photos that they're at peace now. Wherever they are, I just hope they're okay and in a much better place. Before I begin on this story, I'll have a news article linked in the description, just to let you all know that this is a true story and that there's proof. Let's begin. The story is about a mass murder that happened on Halloween in 2020 in Quebec City in Canada. It's a very violent and graphic story. You have been warned. I'm a male, and at the time of the story I was 20 years old. It was a wonderful Halloween in 2020 in Quebec City in Canada. A lot of children were dressed up, people laughing, lots of happiness, and everybody was having fun. It's really the only time we had some happiness and fun in that stupid period of COVID-19. Later in the evening, when it was dark and a lot of people were outside, I was near the Chateau Frontenac. I was with my dog walking and enjoying the moment. Well, at some point, I saw a man with a cool costume. His costume was a samurai, and he had a katana in his hand, a realistic one. I remarked to him that I thought it was a cool costume. He walked near me, looked at me, and he looked at my dog, then back at me, then telling me I had a cute dog. I replied with a simple thank you, and he walked away. It was weird. I could just feel in those few seconds that something was off. Well, about 10 minutes later, right when I was about to walk home, I was still near the Chateau Frontenac, and at some point I had heard someone yelling and crying that someone was stabbed by a man with a katana. Immediately, chills were coursing through my body. I had saw some people running, and everyone was panicking, so as you can imagine, I was panicking too. Even my dog was on edge. I then grabbed my dog, and we started to take off and run. As if the timing couldn't have been more perfect, I began to hear the sounds of the police, the sirens and flashing lights. I was really scared, and I was absolutely terrified I'd see the man again, so I ran with my dog to the nearest stairs. Now, I live all the way down the road, and also in Quebec we have an up city and a down city. I was at the up city, and I actually live in the down city, so we have stairs to go up and down, so I went to the nearest stairs. While I was running, I had saw a man sitting down with a paramedic, and he had blood all over his arm. It was from a clean cut from the katana. Anyways, when I finally got near the stairs, I saw another man covered in blood but still alive. He was also with a paramedic and also a cop, so I was obliged to go down the road without the stairs. There was a lot of cop cars that were passing by, and it was very loud. I was almost home with my dog when I saw 5 cops in alert and offensive mode. One on the front, one in the back, one in the left, one in the right, and one beside me with the dog. And then one of them started yelling at me. "Get back inside! There's a maniac out here!" I replied back with, "I'm sorry, I live nearby. I'm trying to get home and get to my house." "Okay, well hurry up!" he demanded. I could understand his attitude. I didn't take it personal. Everyone was in panic mode. So I finally made it home, but I then saw something that still has me traumatized to this day. I saw one of my neighbors lying on the ground in front of her door right next to her husband, and he was crying his eyes out, going hysterical. Her face was drenched in blood because her head was half sliced open. It was a horrifying sight. I was traumatized. Later that night, the story was all over the news. They were telling all the locals to keep their doors and windows locked and secured, and that the killer's still on the loose, as well as they didn't know if he was acting alone or if others were also involved. So to stay inside and don't go outside for any reason, at least until there is an update of the man being caught. Well, a few hours later, he was eventually caught and arrested. In total, he injured 5 people and murdered 2, all with a fucking katana. I really hope the 2 victims can rest in peace, and I hope this sick fuck rots away for the rest of his life in prison. The thing that really gets to me the most though is, what if I didn't have my dog with me? Did he really give me a pass because I had a cute dog? If I didn't have my dog, would I be added to the list of victims? That thought gives me chills to this day. A couple of weeks ago, my friends and I were hanging out after a day at school. I'll call them G, D, and E. We usually hang out, but what was different about this day is it was so fucking hot, and we aren't used to it being hot where we live. We wanted to go to Lucky's and get some drinks and snacks, but from the park where we're hanging out at, it was like an hour away. So we decided it was smart to go to one of the most sketchy 7-Elevens that exists in our town. We got all of our snacks and walked out of the 7-Eleven, and they have one table right in front of the store, and then right in front and next to the parking lot. I had realized a car had pulled up to the space right next to us. It wasn't that big of a deal because there was like 7 parking spots, but I of course didn't think anything of it at first. So D and G kept dancing, while E and I were just talking and eating chips. So one thing to mention is that D's parents smoke in their apartment all the time, and it's really messed up D's lungs. So they can't really do stuff such as dancing without needing to stop and take deep breaths. Not to mention D was twerking, and I saw that G was looking at something and had seemed off, but I just figured they were zoning out or something. Well, G and D looked at me and then said, "Should we tell him?" And of course, I was confused by this, because like, what are they gonna tell me? Well, G then started walking to me and then whispered to me, "Those people in the truck are recording us." To give you a shittily made layout, the truck was parked right in front of the door to 7-Eleven that was right next to us at the circle table, the one we were sitting at. I was sitting back to the truck, E was sitting on the right side of me, and D was sitting on the left side of me, and G was sitting across. There was a small park behind where we were sitting, but there was like a wood wall around it. I immediately got all of my shit, stood up, and then walked into a corner, all while G told E what was going on. Then there was a man and woman who got out of the truck, and we expected them to like try to get us in the truck or something, but they just went into the 7-Eleven. We took this as a chance to run to the park that was behind us, but since we aren't dumb, we actually took a picture of their license plate. Once we got to the park, we were all breathing really heavily, except E was actually shaking and crying. I started asking G how long they'd been recording us for, and she said that they had been recording us for about 1 to 2 minutes. I instantly knew that they were most likely recording us for D and G, as they were young girls. E did say that the people in the truck looked high as fuck, but it still doesn't help very much for D and G, especially after we looked up the license plate and we realized they lived in our town. So yeah, that's fucking wonderful. Of course, G had to go as soon as this happened, and then left me, D, and E all alone. We were trying to calm D down, but that didn't really help that much. And of course, D and I both have very bad anxiety, so we were shaking. I also have history of passing out when scared, so when I started getting dizzy, I knew I had to go. I know that the man and woman that were recording us didn't actually do anything to us, but it's still creepy as hell to think about what could have happened and how much worse it could have gotten. I'm just glad we all decided to get the hell out of there when we did, or who knows what else could have happened. So for a little bit of background, I'm a married 21-year-old female. I'm a pretty small person, and I live in one of the most unsafe towns in North Carolina. I also have 2 dogs, a large bully mix, and a medium-sized lab/border collie mix. It's also important to know that I live at the very end of my street, right in front of some woods. This happened about a month ago. It was around 6 o'clock at night, and my husband was working a 24-hour shift, leaving me home alone with our 2 dogs. Typically my dogs are pretty quiet, and they don't bark unless someone's literally up on our front porch. This particular evening, I was on the couch watching TV when my dogs lost their minds. They were both growling and lunging at the front windows, then running to my sliding glass back door and doing the same. I had a bad feeling, but I checked the cameras and they hadn't picked up any movement, so I brushed it off as being paranoid since I was home alone. After about 10 minutes, the dogs still hadn't settled, so I decided to let them into the backyard. As soon as I did, My smaller dog took off towards the side of my fence obscured by trees. My larger dog stayed next to me, still growling. I had heard my fence shaking, so I ran over and I saw my smaller dog attacking the fence and what looked like a woman's tennis shoe. It was stuck in the mud off in the trees. Again, I dismissed it as being paranoid because teenagers are known to have bonfires and such back there, and I figured that's where the shoe had come from. On top of that, I'm normally a pretty paranoid person. I got the dogs inside and I didn't think much of it until the next night. My husband was home and it was around 9 p.m. when someone knocked. My husband looked out of the windows all around the front of the house and all he saw was a teenage girl standing on our porch. She looked the same age as our neighbor's daughter's friends, and that said neighbor has a lot of health issues, so we assumed something had happened. My husband, being the paranoid type himself, grabbed his weapon and held it behind the door when he opened it. I was in the hallway out of view, holding onto my dogs who were again growling and trying to lunge. It's important to note that they've never acted that way towards a person. As my husband was talking to this woman, I had heard her ask him about his age, where he went to school, and had asked if we had children. He declined to answer any of the questions, and then she asked the creepiest one yet. She asked if any of our neighbors had kids, if there's any bachelors or child-free couples that she should avoid. My husband just said he couldn't help her and shut the door. After that, we had actually heard her laugh and then say, "So you really don't know?" before she then walked away. We decided that it was really sketchy and that we needed to at least call the non-emergency line. While I was doing so, my husband was watching our cameras. He showed me as this woman walked around our house and tried to look in our windows. When she triggered our motion sensor light, I thought I would vomit. The shoes she had on were identical to the one that I had just seen outside my fence the day before. I made a report, but nothing ever came of it that I know of. But I had later learned that this woman had also gone to 2 other houses that same night. Both were single women with small children. After I heard that they had kids, I remember that the previous day that the kids my neighbor babysat had been playing in my front yard. It seems very likely that this woman was out looking for children that night, which is absolutely terrifying in itself. I'm a 26-year-old female, and at the time this story takes place, I was a broke college student. I was very naive and a chronic people pleaser, and I avoided confrontation at all costs. One night I was waiting on the bus home after visiting some friends. It wasn't very late. It was 7 p.m. on a weeknight, and I was tired and I was really looking forward to getting home to unwind. I'd been at this bus stop loads of times, and I often encountered familiar faces, though this time it was just me. So I popped my headphones in to listen to some music while I waited, and I messed around on my phone, keeping an eye on the time. The bus was due at 20 past, and I'd only been there for about 5 minutes when I had sensed someone near me. I glanced to the side, and I saw a man around my age had come under the shelter. I ignored him and continued looking at my phone. Suddenly, I had heard someone loudly saying, "Hey, excuse me!" So I turned to see the man was right next to me, staring right at me. I took out my headphone and I asked him what he wanted, and he grinned at me before asking what time the bus came. I told him it was usually around 20 past the hour, and then looked down at my phone again, hoping he'd get the hint that I didn't want to have a long conversation. Sadly, he didn't. I could sense him still staring at me, and when I looked at him, he didn't look away. I smiled awkwardly, which, looking back, I wish that I hadn't because this probably only encouraged him. But like I said, I was a really huge people pleaser back then, and to be blunt, I was an idiot. It seemed like out of nowhere he started trying to talk to me again. He asked if I took this bus often, to which I responded yes, and again, smiled tightly at him, willing him to just go away and leave me alone. I shouldn't have admitted that I took this bus regularly, because now he could determine my schedule if he really wanted to. But again, I was an idiot and incredibly naive back then. Then he started complimenting me. "You have gorgeous skin," he told me, which I found to be an odd compliment, but I just smiled wearily at him and tried to focus on my phone. By now, I'd turned my music off, but I kept the headphones in to give the impression that I was trying to ignore him. But I knew I needed to be able to hear him perfectly because he was being creepy and I felt uncomfortable. When the bus came, I was relieved, even though he got on with me. It wasn't packed, but we weren't alone, and I thought he would leave me alone now. I was so wrong. I sat at the front, and to my discomfort, so did he, directly across from me. I was sitting in these fold-down seats usually reserved for people with prams or wheelchairs because I wanted to be closer to the front as I felt uncomfortable. He sat on those same seats directly opposite me. When the bus started, he didn't say anything for about 5 minutes, but kept staring at me. Eventually, he had started asking me over the engine noise what stop I got off at. I politely informed him that this wasn't any of his business, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I was texting my friend what was happening, and I also texted some of my family members just to let them know of the situation too, just in case. I was feeling so uneasy, and it was only getting worse. He told me that he wanted to walk me home, and that he could come over to my place and show me a good time. I was disgusted by him. He was leering at me, and he kept talking about my skin, saying, "You know, you have such good skin. I want to stroke it so badly. I love girls with nice skin. I bet you have even more that I can't see." I was so disgusted by his comments, and I just felt angry and violated. Angry at him for being such a creep, and angrier at myself for being so scared that I couldn't bring myself to just tell him to fuck off. This went on for a bit, before the bus driver stopped the bus and got off his seat. He approached the man, and he demanded he get off the bus immediately. He must have heard the man, as he was talking loudly, and we were at the front. The man then began to protest, and he even had the audacity to say he was my boyfriend. The bus driver looked at me, before shaking his head at the man, and then demanding once again he get off the bus now. He informed the man that if he refused to comply, there would be trouble. The man begrudgingly sludged off the bus, glaring at us. The bus driver then asked me if I was okay, and I just broke down. He asked me if I had any friends or family that I could call to meet me off the bus, and I told him I could call someone. He nodded before telling me he had overheard the man being creepy a few times and decided to intervene. He told me that he had 2 daughters, and that if one of them were me, he'd really hope someone would intervene to protect them too. He went back to driving, and I called one of my friends. No one else on the bus did anything. There were about 4 people, all around my age, but they just stared at me uncomfortably. I don't know if they felt guilty, maybe called out by the bus driver, but none of them did anything. Maybe they didn't hear anything or notice anything was amiss, but it was still scary to know I was so close to people, and I was still preyed on by some weirdo. When it was my stop to get off, I kept thanking the driver for helping me. He told me not to worry and to stay safe. I didn't live far from the bus stop that I got dropped off at, and I remained on the phone with my friend until I was finally home with the door locked. I avoided that bus stop from that day forward, opting to always get a taxi home instead. I never saw the creepy man ever again, and hopefully, I never will. I'm a 28-year-old female from England. This happened 13 years ago. I was 15 at the time. I used to always chill with an old friend at her place, and we'll call her Kay. Now, Kay was that friend with the mom who was always sound with whatever we did, just so long as it was in the house, so I was always there. On this night, we had just ordered takeaway and watched a few movies. 11 p.m. rolled around and I decided to walk home, so I told Kay I was bouncing. It was a Saturday, so my parents weren't fussed about what time I came home. Anyway, the walk from Kay's to mine was about a mile long, and it would take me about 20 minutes to walk. I'll explain the layout of the walk. So basically, when you left K Street, you walked down a main road, a long stretch which then led to a mini roundabout. Once you crossed the roundabout, there was a quieter road which led to an alleyway which came out onto my street. So I said goodbye and I left. There were loads of streetlights down the main road, so it was pretty lit up. I sparked a rollie and I started my walk. About 2 minutes into it, I had started to get a weird feeling, like when you feel eyes on you. I looked behind me and I didn't see anything, so I just shrugged it off and continued walking. A couple of minutes passed, but I couldn't shake that feeling. I walked this route many times and I've never felt like this. I turned around again and I could see a slim hooded person walking behind me dressed head to toe in black. I couldn't see their face as they were too far behind. I just thought to myself, it's probably nothing. They're probably just walking. But I decided to cross the road to see if he would follow. Well, he fucking did. He crossed the road at the same time as I did. My heart started racing. My adrenaline was pumping. Thank fuck I was wearing my Nikes. I started walking faster, picking up the pace, and he did the same. Being so late at night, nobody was around, and there were no houses in sight. By this point, I could see the roundabout, and I started booking it. He did the same. He started fucking chasing me. I've never ran so fast in my life. I pegged it into the alleyway, and I could hear his footsteps getting closer and closer. I jumped the wall in the alley and then ducked. The other side was overgrown with bushes and grass, so I jumped in a bush and led down. I could hear his footsteps slow down as he approached the area that I jumped. I wanted to get my phone out to text my dad, but I knew he would see the light and I didn't want to risk it. I tried to slow my breathing. It went quiet for a minute, and I thought maybe he moved, but he jumped the fucking wall. He must have seen me jump the wall. Shit. I was panicking, my heart thumping, and I prayed that he wouldn't find me. I kept as still and quiet as I could, knowing he was 20 yards away from me. He didn't fuck off, he just stood there. I heard him then say, "Well, fuck!" in a deep, frustrated tone like he knew that he lost me. He then quietly creeped about searching for me. Tears filled my eyes. This is it. This is how I die. That's all I could think. His footsteps started to get quieter, and I guessed he was searching the area, which basically came out into a field. I decided to risk it, so really quietly I pulled my phone out, using my cardigan to try and shield the light, and I quickly text my dad asking for help, saying that someone's following me down the alley by our home. I managed to send the text, and I then realized that I couldn't hear a thing. I hoped he had moved on, but I was too scared to look or move just in case I made a noise and he heard. I felt like I was there for hours, although in reality it was probably just minutes. Next thing, I heard the familiar voice of my dad calling my name and the sickening sound of the creep then running away. He was closer than I thought. Thank God I didn't move. I immediately called for my dad and he found me. I burst into tears whilst telling him what happened. He was fuming, more so that he couldn't catch the sorry bastard. He ran off before my dad could see what he looked like. He took me home and my mom had already rang the police. They came and took a statement, but I never did hear if he was caught. I couldn't really give the best description considering it was dark and all I could see was black clothes. I never walked home late from K's again, and I never walk on my own past 8 p.m. I'm an 18-year-old male, but I was 14 when the story took place, and my attire during this incident was a black hoodie, black sweatpants, and a hat. And I also want to mention I can easily be overwhelmed with anxiety if too many things are happening at once or out of nowhere. So this isn't a normal story you may have heard before, and I fought myself for some time over whether or not to share this, as nothing bad had actually happened. However, this still scared the ever-loving daylight out of me. My name is Brandon, and I live in the Ozarks of Arkansas in a neighborhood of townhouses that are directly parallel to a main road that is usually very busy. I love taking walks at night just to clear my head of stress, mainly from school, and to also try and tire myself out, as I suffer from mild insomnia. I still enjoy taking these walks, although I'm much more careful. Anyways, enough of my ranting. One night I couldn't sleep, as my insomnia had prevented me from doing so, and I was extremely thirsty. So I decided to walk down to the gas station that was less than half a mile away from my house to grab a quick drink. Once I'd gotten around halfway down the street from my house and was about to turn towards the main road, I noticed a pair of headlights appear behind me. At first, I just thought it was someone heading to work or just passing through, but I quickly picked up on the fact that the car had slowed down to match my pace. Soon, I had turned onto the main road, and the car followed, still keeping pace with me. My heart hit my stomach once I had realized this, and I quickly turned off my music and dialed my mom, whom I regrettably hadn't told that I was leaving, but she was sleeping and she didn't hear her phone. My heart only began to race as I began to panic. As I was about to dial 911, 4 police cruisers had pulled up next to me in the vehicle, as their lights had then turned on, blinding me with their red and blue beams, and soon enough, officers had quickly exited their vehicles. Without any second thought, I put my hands up, terrified that I had done something wrong as the cops had approached me and began to pat me down. I had asked in a stuttering and shaky voice to the officer, Did I do something wrong? He was patting me down, and he hadn't found anything on me, and he then stood back up and said, "No, buddy, you haven't done anything wrong. We just got a call about someone suspiciously walking down the street near the scene of a car break-in that had recently happened." Confused, I responded back with, "Car break-in? Where at?" And the officer responded with, "Just behind this neighborhood," he said, pointing behind me to the other set of duplexes. Someone had broken into that gentleman's car and threatened him with a knife when he came out to see what the noise was. The cop had said, gesturing to the vehicle that was following me, which also had an officer talking to the driver. After a few questions and me telling them why I was out so late, the officers had offered me a ride home. But the story does end on a good note, however. The gentleman who had phoned the police had gotten out of his car, then came up to me and said, "I'm so sorry, kiddo. I didn't mean to frighten you like this." No, it's okay. I get it," I responded. "I totally understand. You were just trying to find the people who threatened you. Also, I know my attire doesn't exactly look good walking alone at night," I said as the gentleman and I shared a chuckle over the whole situation. After that, the police tried phoning my mom, but alas, nothing, as she was still sleeping. But soon they had driven me home and then dropped me off. Other than my mom being very upset about this whole ordeal, I ended up being okay. If I have to give one piece of advice to others who walk at night, it's always be aware of your surroundings and try to wear bright clothing, both for your safety and others, and also so you don't look suspicious. Be safe, everyone. So at the time I was 15. I'm a female, and I've been raised around always carrying pepper spray or a taser just to make sure I'm safe. So I was at my bus stop waiting for the 4:30 p.m. bus. I had my headphones in, and I was texting a family member on Facebook. I didn't see the guy that was standing right behind me, because at one point he was all the way across the stop. I was really distracted, which is partially my own fault. Anyways, he had started asking me for my phone. I turned around and I took out a headphone because I couldn't hear him properly. I asked him to repeat himself, and he then said,
"I see you have Facebook. Can I have your phone to log in?"
I told him no and that I didn't feel comfortable doing that. As I'm looking at him, I'm making sure I memorize everything he's wearing. I was so scared that something was going to happen to me, so I remember what he was wearing. I don't know if I should really go into specifics about what he was wearing though, but he did have white all around his mouth and he smelled horrible. Like that's all I could think about. He smelled rancid and I wanted to throw up. He kept asking me for my phone and I told him no multiple times. At one point I got fed up and I started walking away. Keep in mind there's a bunch of people around when this happened. So I walk away to the other side of the bus stop and he started following me. At this point I'm really freaking out, thinking I'm about to get robbed or hurt. I was incredibly scared. I called my mom and I told her how this man was harassing me and that I was really scared because he kept trying to reach for my phone to grab it from me. I'm not one for conflict, so I just kept walking away from him. My mom told me to call the police, and the entire time I'm on the phone with the operator, he's still following me. Up until I start describing him, and at one point he hears me and he runs away into an apartment complex. The police showed up 5 minutes later, and one officer talked to me, and then a bunch of other police cars started searching the apartment that I saw him run into. As far as I know, he wasn't caught. I haven't taken the bus since, and I've been afraid that he's going to show up out of nowhere because I go to school in that area. He also did this to another woman at the same time I was there, and he chased her all the way down the street. Not one person ever stepped up to try and help clear a child while she was being harassed. That really blows my mind to this day. I don't remember this event fully, so bear with me. I'm an 18-year-old female, but at the time of this incident, I was 15. Me and my cousin C used to be inseparable. We were hanging out at my place and got a late-night craving for some salt and vinegar chips. We decided to head down to a gas station that was only a couple of blocks away from us. It was 2:45 in the morning, and since we didn't have a car, we decided to walk. We got our shoes and jackets on and headed out the door. About halfway there, C remembered that she forgot her money. She decided she would run back since she was faster, and then I would meet her at the store. I was unsure of this because I was aware of all the weird people that would be out at this time, but after much convincing, I agreed. She started running in the direction of my house, and I went on my way. I wanted to get to the gas station as soon as possible and avoid any conversation with anyone until I got there. I took a well-known side street in my town and walked fast. There wasn't much light aside from the occasional car driving by, and I turned on the street to the gas station. I noticed a parked car with its lights on. I thought nothing of it. That was my first mistake. I went on my way, and as I saw the gas station over the hill, I'd heard a loud man's voice.
Hey there!
I almost jumped out of my skin. I didn't think he was talking to me, so I kept walking. Then again, I heard the same voice.
Hey! I'm fucking talking to you! I know you heard me!
I then stopped and turned around. That was my second mistake. I then saw a tall, buff man step out of the parked car. All of a sudden, he starts to rush at me. I wanted to run, but I was frozen. Right when he got about 10 steps from me, I snapped out of my frozen trance and then ran as fast as my legs would let me. I got to the gas station safely, and I told the cashier. She said that she would keep a lookout for any strange people, but in the meantime, she suggested I stay in the store until my cousin got there. I agreed. About 5 minutes passed, when all of a sudden my cousin barged into the store out of breath and panicked. There's a weird man who keeps following me. I asked her to describe him. I didn't get a good look at him, but if I remember, it was some weird man in a small dark car. That's the same description I gave the cashier. I thought to myself, maybe it's just a coincidence. We bought the chips and then carefully headed back home. On our way, we had noticed a man sitting at a bus stop with a brown paper bag in his hands. We thought it was sketchy. C asked me, "Are the buses even running right now?" "No, I don't believe they are," I replied. Unfortunately, though, we had to pass the bus stop to get on my street. As we walked by the strange man, he said,
Hey girls, make sure you guys are safe. There's a lot of weirdos around here.
I recognized the voice. It was the same man from earlier. I looked at my cousin and then whispered, "Get ready to run." She agreed, and we kept walking. Once we passed him, we picked up our pace. Next thing I know, I hear loud footsteps behind us. I didn't even take the time to look back. "Now!" I yelled. Me and C then took off, and we didn't stop until we got back to my place. We ran inside and locked the door. My mistake was thinking that was the end of it. We sat on the couch in the living room and caught our breaths. A couple of hours had passed and we had heard a knock on the door. We both froze and then looked at each other. I wanted to tell my mom, but she was away at work and wouldn't be returning until after 8. It was only 3:15. C got up and then sneaked to the window to take a peek. "Oh my God, it's him!" she yelled. We both curled up in the kitchen and we waited for him to leave. Unfortunately, it wasn't that easy. For the next 30 minutes, all we heard was him yelling insults at us, hoping we'd answer the door.
Open the fucking door, girls! If you don't, I'll find my own way to get in.
Then he said something that sent chills down my spine to this day.
You better hope I don't get my fucking hands on you. I swear to God, I'll take my time with the both of you.
C started crying. After he didn't get what he wanted, he left. Thankfully, that was the last time we heard from him. Once my mom got home, C went straight to my room. I followed. We agreed not to tell anyone due to the fact that we would probably get lectured and blamed for it. Looking back at this event, I'm not sure why I didn't call the police. If I'm being honest, it didn't even feel real. It felt like a very bad dream. Me and C have grown apart since then, but anytime we get together, we always talk about that scary night. So I'll call myself Spirit for the sake of this story, and I'll refer to my sister as Jen. The story happened recently, so the details are still a bit fresh. Jen and I are both in high school, and homecoming was just around the corner, and my sister needed to buy her dress. So after my therapy session on Thursday, we went to the mall. It was the evening, about 6:30 p.m., so it was already dark. Jen and I got off as our mom and grandma stayed in the car and waited for us. We entered through a clothing store, and not long after, I noticed a creepy guy with sunglasses wearing a hoodie who was light-skinned, and he looked like he was in his early 20s standing behind a rack. So I kept an eye on him while my sister looked. When she didn't find anything she wanted, we left and then we went to a Windsor. While we were walking, we were discussing the creepy guy, and I kept turning back every 5 seconds just to make sure he didn't follow us. My sis and I entered the Windsor, and I was looking through the dresses and heels, and I was in there for like an hour. When I was with my sister in an aisle, we saw the same man yet again, and he passed us to walk to the exit. It freaked me out because I didn't even see him walk in. He was so close to us when he went past, and it really freaked me out. There was no coincidence since the mall is big, and the chances of him being in another store with us was pretty low. Plus, Windsor is a girl's store, so that thought really freaked me out, and I just knew he was following us. But after my sister checked out after about 45 minutes of seeing the man, we went to get drinks before leaving. Luckily after that, I didn't see him, and we were able to leave the mall safely. Jen didn't want me to tell our mom because she would never be allowed out this late again. So to this day, our mom still doesn't know. I know this story might not be that scary to many of you, and sure, we don't actually know if the man had any sinister intentions, but we both felt the bad vibes, and I really don't think he had anything good planned for us. So yeah, everyone, always trust your gut. I've been thinking of submitting this story for quite some time. I don't know if it's good enough, but it's honestly the creepiest and scariest moment of my life. So here it goes. I live in Poland in a studio flat. My neighborhood is pretty safe. I've lived here for almost 4 years, and only 1 or 2 bad things have happened. It probably helps that I have municipal police literally downstairs. This happened early this year in January. I was getting ready for bed. I made sure that my door was locked. I'm kind of paranoid about that, so I checked probably like 3 times just to be sure. But this night, I didn't put the key into the lock. I remember this stupid article saying if you do that, it actually helps thieves or something like that. I have a cat, and that'll be important later in the story. I go to sleep, earplugs in my ears because I can't sleep without them. It was 1 or 2 in the morning when I woke up. I then see my 2 neighbors standing right next to my bed. I then freaked out and screamed because how on earth could they get into my apartment? Then the lady says that when she was coming back from work, she had saw my cat on my staircase, and she noticed my door was slightly opened. She was scared to come inside by herself, so she went upstairs and got her husband to come with her. Here's the chilling part. I knew that I locked the door. I just knew it. There were no signs of burglary, so how the hell did someone get in? Nothing was missing. Nothing was stolen. I had my laptop on the table and it was still here. I immediately called my landlord and he told me to call the police, so I did. They came in and checked everything. The only other possible way to get inside was through the balcony. But I live on a 2nd story, and from the 1st floor balcony you would need a ladder to get to mine. The police had told me that I was sleepwalking, but when I put away my keys, I had put them in a very specific spot, and they were still there, exactly where I put them. I know that I wasn't sleepwalking, and I know I locked the door. The next day, I had talked to my landlord's wife. She was so unbothered that it made me cry. I was so scared that night that I didn't sleep, and I had to take a day off work because I didn't want to leave the apartment just in case the potential intruder came back and killed my cat. Yeah, I'm that kind of cat mom, if you know what I mean. Back to the story. She, the wife, then tells me that she also had a similar experience when they lived there too. She was reading when the neighbor's dog just came in through the door. And here's the part that made me lose it. She said that the door just sometimes bounces off the hinges and opens itself. How in the world? I mean, can that really happen? And if so, why wasn't I informed about it when I moved in? I don't buy it honestly, but I made them check the door a few days later and they said everything was fine. However, they didn't even change the locks. But I pay really low rent, so I guess that's the price of it. To this day, I have no idea what happened, and I don't even want to know. It took me a few solid months to move on. You really think you're safe in your own house until something like this happens. Now I always make sure that I put my keys into the lock, and I even have a stool against the door. When we thought the door had just opened itself, I had a thought that maybe my cat then opened it wider. I don't know. This is so strange, and I hope nothing like this ever happens again. And I owe my cat for being a scaredy shit, so she didn't run away and was just chilling outside the door. She got treats and snuggles the next day. And of course, my sweet neighbors who cared enough to check on me. I'll never forget that. So yeah, that's my weird and creepy story. I also have a message for anyone that's listening. Make sure you're safe in your own house, even if that means checking the doors and windows dozens of times. Losing that sense of safety really makes you hopeless and fearful like you've never felt before. Stay safe, everyone. I'm a 24-year-old female living in Savannah, Georgia. My husband and I moved into a townhome in the suburbs in May of 2023. For the most part, we have enjoyed our time here, despite it being pretty expensive. The only thing I would change about this place is our neighbors. We live on the end unit of the block of townhomes, so luckily we only have neighbors on one side of us. But unfortunately, those neighbors are just not the ones you would want. It all started about 2 or 3 months ago when we moved in. We met them, and at first, I thought they were pretty nice and friendly. But as time went on, things changed. Our townhome now constantly smells like weed, despite it being illegal still in the state of Georgia. While annoying, it's not something we were going to the authorities or landlord with, but now I'm not so sure. Right around Christmas time, we were home getting our things together to go out of town to Augusta, Georgia for the holidays to see and be with my husband's family. It was around 9 p.m. when we suddenly started hearing yelling and banging. Assuming it was the TV or loudspeakers our neighbors had, we ignored it. But when it kept happening for another 5 minutes and we heard a loud blood-curdling scream, we knew that something was seriously wrong. My dog, which is a 60-pound coonhound, was barking and growling at the door. Even our 2 cats were freaking out near the windows. My husband and I gave each other a look, trying to figure out what to do. My husband got his 9mm pistol and walked to the door, as he then instructed me to get my phone out and be ready to call 911. I did as I was told while I crept to the door to look through the peephole. As he was doing so, a loud pop went off, signifying a gunshot. It came from the direction of our neighbor's house. My husband and I immediately gathered our dog and 2 cats and ran upstairs to the back bedroom away from any of the windows. I then called 911 and I told them what happened. Cops were soon at our neighbor's house along with an ambulance. Our neighbor was being stretched out and loaded into the back of an ambulance. The cops knocked on our door about 20 minutes later and asked us a bunch of questions. Turns out my neighbor was a local drug dealer. He owed money to someone and couldn't pay it, so he took revenge. I guess a guy showed up to our neighbor's house and had beat up his girlfriend, which was the screaming we heard, and then he shot our neighbor square in the chest. Last I heard, he was stable, and he's now living with his uncle in the next city over. Rest assured, my husband and I will definitely not be renewing our lease. Thank you all for listening, and be safe out there. This only happened a few months ago, and I don't even know if this guy still lives next door to me, but this really scared my family and I. I've been living in my village for about 2 years now, and we live next door to a little old lady and her 1 son. We're not really the kind of family that gets close with our neighbors. We're always civil, say hello, and our how are yous, but that's about it. The lady we live next door to has lived there for years. She seems pretty pleasant. I've never really spoken to her apart from a smile. She never smiles back, by the way. But my parents have spoken to her, and they said she seems nice enough. My mom and dad even gave her a lift home from town once, so I thought she was a normal old lady. As for her son, again, I've seen him about, but I've never spoken to him. We do hear him shouting next door sometimes, but we just thought that he's shouting at a games console or something. Anyway, I live with my mom, dad, brother, and partner. So it's a full house, and boy was I happy that my dad was home when this all went down. One night when we were all asleep, we were rudely awakened at about 2:30 a.m. to pounding on our front door. We have a little Jack Russell, so he had started barking his head off. The banging was really loud. It sounded like someone was trying to break into the house. I was terrified. My dad went downstairs to the front door, and he decided to open the door. Yes, I had a go at him for this the next day because this person could have gotten into our house, or even worse, he could have had a knife or a weapon. When my dad opened the door, he was met by a man. My dad had then asked, what's the problem? To which the man replied back with,
"What's your fucking problem?"
my dad in an instant, which thank God for quick reflexes, slammed the door shut in the man's face and then locked the door. The man started to bang on the door yet again, and when he realized no one was going to answer it, he walked away. I was in my bedroom at the time, and I had looked out my window. I was trying to get a good look at the guy. The guy was shouting outside our house. Then I saw him walk to my neighbor's house where the old lady lives, and that's when I then heard someone say, "Mate, if you don't fucking stop, I'm calling the police." Then the man disappeared. We were all in shock. The village we live in is very quiet. Nothing happens here at all. So we were definitely all pretty shaken. We were pretty much all awake for the rest of the night. Every slight noise scared me. My partner managed to sleep through all of it and only woke up when I accidentally stepped on him to look out the window, which he wasn't very happy about. He felt really bad the next day when he saw how shook up we all were. The next day we were all very alert. I kept my eyes peeled for this guy because I wanted to know who the hell he was. Well, about 2 days later, my partner and I were on our way to work, and there were lots of police that drove past us very quickly with sirens going. I had a bad feeling, so I had messaged my brother asking if everything was okay. I got no reply until I got to work, and then got a message from my dad. As it turns out, the man lived next door. Turns out this old lady didn't just have one son, she had two. My dad then told me that the man was carried out of my neighbor's house in handcuffs and on a stretcher. I felt relieved that he was going to get some help that he so clearly needs, and that hopefully he wouldn't come knocking again. But I was also thinking about how this guy lived next door and none of us knew. Well, he ended up being back 2 days later, so I bought a Ring doorbell straight away. Just so you all know, we didn't call the police. Maybe we should have, but we didn't. If he knocks on our door again, we definitely will. So a few weeks later, my mom was walking down our street and had bumped into another neighbor. This neighbor is someone my mom talks to sometimes. Not close to her or anything, but she seems like a nice lady. My mom had told her what happened, and the lady instantly told us that it was definitely her neighbor's son. Turns out the lady who lived in our house before had the same problem with this guy, but that he used to do it all the time. My mom was absolutely shocked by this. Luckily, we haven't seen this guy since. The little old lady next door hasn't spoken to us since. We think it's because she's ashamed, which is fair enough, but at the same time, I really think we're owed an apology or some kind of explanation. We could have easily called the police on this guy. We always say to ourselves that it's really lucky that he did this to us and not some single mother or someone vulnerable. But I don't ever want to go through this or see him again. I still get sleepless nights thinking that this guy will come back banging on our door, but I really hope it doesn't happen. My name is Summer, and this happened about a month ago. I had just gotten back from my boyfriend's house, and I was making my way out of the parking lot when I heard two white men shouting to what I assume was their mother, saying, "Listen, if a girl comes up to me and she asks for help, I'm gonna help her." I'm pretty sure they were drunk. I mean, it was a Friday night after all, but I was intrigued with the conversation, and I pretended to check my mailbox as I listened. Then he says, "We gotta go inside. Like, man, she said she felt weird in her pants. I don't fuck with that. I mean, clearly something's wrong. How long until the police get here?" He then tried to enter into the section of my apartment complex. Now, we have key fobs that open the glass door to the different sections, but the key fob will only open your section, no one else's. He didn't live in my section, but his family were waiting for a girl to come. As I walked over to my section, I saw 3 Indian-looking men come out to talk to the white family. which the white family kept saying, "Bring her out. She needs to wait out here with us. Something isn't right. You look pretty well dressed. What do you do for work?" The Indian people were pretty quiet and they kept it short, then responding, "I work at a factory here." At this point, I'm very interested in this conversation, and as nosy as I am, I stayed and listened. Not even hiding, I was eavesdropping. The white mother then came over to me with what I assumed was her daughter, and they then told me, "We were taking out the trash and this girl looked so scared." She then came up to us and asked us for help. She said that she came here from Texas and she thought something was done with her drink, as well as how the inside of her pants didn't feel right. We think that they sex trafficked her here. We were waiting for the police to come, but I don't know if the girl's gonna come out from the building. And just then, the girl started to come down from the stairs. She looked like she was either Mexican or Indian. I couldn't really tell. I know that she was young though, maybe 17 or 18. The other girls and I then went up to her, and then she said, "I can't stop shaking. I don't know what's happening." I asked her if she needed a hug, but she said no, which was understandable. I had never been in this kind of situation before, and I didn't want to bombard the poor girl with questions, especially when she so clearly looks like she can't even form a thought. The other woman then embraced her and consoled her, and then told her, "You can wait with us till the police get here. They're on their way. Are you okay with dogs? We have a little dog in our car." We had escorted her outside, and the girl wanted to wait in the car with the white folks. As they were passing the Indian men talking to the guys, one of the Indian men then said, "You want to go with them? You don't feel safe with us? You want to go to the hospital? Yeah, okay. So should I just buy you a plane ticket back to Texas?" Each question they asked, it was like a parent belittling their kid. "Oh, you don't want to take a nap? Okay, so I guess you don't want to go to Disneyland either. I'll just return the tickets since you don't want to listen." With each question, the girl was more hesitant and scared to give a truthful answer. She then said, "Yes, I want to go with them." But she ignored the rest of the girls waiting in the car, and the men continued to talk. One of the Indian men then said that her brother had died and how they had brought her out here to get her away from it or whatever, and that she was fine. At this point, the Indian men were starting to stare at me, and each time they talked to each other, they'd speak a different language. I started to feel unsafe. Like if it's true that they trafficked or raped her, I was really hoping they wouldn't scout me in my place too. It would be pretty easy for them since we were in the same section. I went upstairs and brought out my German Shepherd out to the balcony to still listen to what was happening, but to also show the Indian men that I have a big scary German Shepherd in hopes that it would discourage them from any idea that I could be the next victim. But while sitting up there, I could see the Indian men keep looking at me and my dog, and one of them actually tried to rile up my dog, whispering and staring at him to get him to bark or something. The police eventually did come out and talk to both parties. After walking my dog outside, the cop had started to leave as well as the car with the girl in it. This is why I assumed the girl wasn't a minor, since she could decide to leave with the strangers. Right when I had seen the cop just about to leave, I had ran up to him and I asked him if he could escort me to my door, because the Indian people were still out there by the door. He then asked me who the apartment manager was, and he told me to notify them of this. He said that he'd escort me, and he asked if I knew anything about the situation. I just told him, "The Indian people do live across from me. I don't see them much, but they're not very sociable neighbors. It always seems like there's a lot of guests in their apartment, but other than that, I really don't know much about them. However, the girl, I do think something happened to her. When I'd first seen her, it was like her eyes and body were screaming with fear. When I made it back to my apartment, I did notice that there was another cop speaking to the Indians. So I went back on my balcony to listen and be nosy yet again with my dog. From what I could hear, the cop was saying, Yeah, I'm pretty sure the girl was intoxicated. And of course, my dog bumps into my patio chair, and the metal makes a loud-ass clank. Of course, my dog blew my cover, which was pretty embarrassing. The last thing I heard before I went inside was the Indian guys were playing it off by saying, "Yeah, I really feel attacked here. I didn't do anything wrong. I know I'm Indian, but that's just my ethnicity." I have no idea what was done after this, and I've never seen the girl after that. I don't know what happened to her or where she is now, but I really hope she's okay. So for context, I'm a 20-year-old female, and at the time of these events, I was around 12 to 13. So I grew up in a very rural area. Like, my town was so small that it was legally considered a village. My house is one of 4 on a span of about 40 acres. There was my childhood home, my grandparents' house that was right up the street, and 2 neighbors. One of the neighbors, we'll call T, had been living across near my family for as long as I could remember, and he rented out a trailer he owned which was inhabited by the 4th neighbor, who we'll call J. Jay and his girlfriend, who we'll call A, had moved in just a few months before these events, and I hadn't really met them. I knew of them, but I hadn't interacted with them directly. The day that I met Jay and A was extremely awkward, as I was a kid, and I didn't really want to talk to them. But my grandma had made me go with her to drop off some vegetables that she had grown in her garden. When they came out, right after my grandma knocked on their trailer door, I was first struck by how they looked. I know that it sounds bad, but I'm not judging. But I know that both of them were addicted to meth. My grandma started the conversation, and I tried to be polite as I was raised to be, by then introducing myself when told to do so. I wasn't really able to finish my sentence, as I noticed Jay was staring at me very intently. He looked like he was either mad or hungry, or even both. Not the creepiest off the bat, as they both seemed polite enough, and I brushed off the stare, just him trying to be polite, looking at me as I spoke to him as most people do. The creepy part is that as time went on, he began to try and be near me more and more. He'd ride his bike past our house over and over for what seemed like hours, all while me and my brother played catch in the yard. Then he began to go to church with me, my brother, and my grandparents. He made sure to sit next to me in the back seat of the car as he rode with us. If my brother tried to sit in the middle so I wasn't right next to Jay, he'd throw a fit about how my brother was squishing him against the door. Then he began coming to my grandma's house whenever she'd have me and my brother after school, offering to tutor me with various subjects. What really scared me was that I began to see him walking near our house at night, trying to shine a flashlight into my window. He tried various things to get close to me. He tried to convince my parents to let him teach me how to golf, tried to help me practice my catching positions for softball, and he tried to get me to go with him and A to the movies. And also, none of these things ever included my brother, only me. Things finally came to a head when I was playing with my dog outside in our front yard, and he had started repeatedly doing laps on his bike down the road again, staring at me just like he did the day we met. I was extremely uncomfortable, as you can all imagine. I've always had very good intuition about people, and something was just really off with him. But that day, I was terrified. He parked his bike right in the middle of the road and got off. He started walking towards me at almost a jog, and I just kept backing away from him. What happened next is why I honestly believe that dogs are a much better judge of character than people could ever hope to be. My boxer dog ran up to him and launched herself onto him when he was about 6 feet away from me. She tore into his arm, and I saw blood. I started to scream, and my mom ran out shortly after. She was trying to pull my dog off of him, but as soon as she was able to, holding onto the dog's collar, she started yelling at him, asking why he was in our yard in the first place with me all alone. He couldn't answer her, and he just started running back to his bike, riding back to the trailer. My grandma ended up driving him to the hospital, as J&A didn't have a car, and I learned later on that he got 16 stitches from the bite. He never gave a reason as to why he was approaching me, and they ended up moving out shortly after. I haven't seen him since, and I'm still terrified to this day to run into him again. I'm a male in my early 30s, and this story took place when I was a teenager. In the summer of 2005, my cousin and aunt came over to my house to hang out one weekend afternoon. This was a regular thing ever since we were kids. I was 14 going on 15 at the time, and my cousin just turned 13. It was a nice summer afternoon, so the two of us decided to take a stroll around my neighborhood. I'd like to note that I'm physically disabled, and I use a power chair to get around. Anyway, my cousin and I started our stroll. I don't remember how long we were strolling around from, but as we came back on the street I lived on, my cousin and I were stopped by a strange older man. He started talking to us, asking what we were up to and if we were siblings. I thought that he was a neighbor of mine and that my dad might have known him as well. So I said that we were cousins and that we were just taking a stroll. Then he had started asking about my disability. Again, I didn't think anything of it, so I just explained that I was born this way. Right at that point, he started to rub my legs, and he told me that he could fix my legs and that I'll be able to walk. I just knew this was bullshit, so I politely said that there was nothing he could do to help me. My cousin and I just looked at each other like, is this guy for real? After a few minutes of trying to convince me that he could actually help by massaging my legs to help me walk, I think he realized that we weren't scared of him, so he just said, I live in this house right over here. And he had pointed to the house we were right in front of, continuing to say, tell your parents about my offer. Let them think it over. I just said okay, but really thinking, yeah, I'm not saying shit to anyone. Then my cousin and I told him that we gotta get home. He asked where I live, so I just pointed to a random direction, then said, over there. He bought onto my lie, so he let us go, but not before reminding me to tell my parents about his offer. After that, my cousin and I ran back home as fast as possible. When we were a few yards away from the old man, we looked back, and he was gone. We got back to my house and entered the backyard. Luckily, my mom and aunt were inside, so we had some time to catch our breaths. We kinda just laughed the whole situation off, and we both agreed not to tell anyone. At the time, I wasn't that scared of the situation, but living in today's society where creeps are literally everywhere, thinking back to that situation, it's really scary to think about. Especially while being a physically disabled person, we were sitting ducks when it comes to predators. Moral of the story is to always be self-aware of your surroundings, and don't ever talk to anyone you don't know personally, even if you think you might know who they are through another person. Just don't risk it. When I was 16, my family and I moved into a new house across the state of California. For reference, my parents are divorced, and I have 4 siblings. My mom has full custody over me, and my mom and stepdad have split custody over my siblings, so oftentimes I'm either babysitting my siblings or home alone while my mom's at work. We ended up moving to this new house because of my stepdad's increase in his income. He had a major boost in his business, and things started to work out really well for him. So he had offered to buy us a nicer house to give us a fresh new start that's also super close to his own house. This way it would just work out way better for sharing the kids and favors and such. My mom got a new better paying job as well, and we moved down there. But she's been working long hours while she's been getting started. So oftentimes I'm tasked with taking care of the siblings and dropping them off, and even sometimes picking them up from their dad's house since my mom's working most hours of the day. The way their arrangement works is my mom has them for the weekend, and their dad has them for the week. I'm much more introverted, and so during the weeks when my mom's at work, I have the house all to myself, and I usually just do homework and watch TV. I chill out, and I rarely ever invite friends over or go out. After my mom married my stepdad and he brought all these kids into our lives, I kind of just lost my friends because I never had time for them, as I was pretty much babysitting almost constantly because of my parents' long working hours. I have a pretty normal routine of coming home from school, locking the doors, and getting something to eat. My mom normally gets off work at 9, unless she has overtime and other things she needs to do. So after I get out of school and take the bus home, I get there at about 3, which gives me about 6 hours to do my chores, homework, and whatever the hell else I want to do before my mom gets home. Right about a month after we moved into this house, we had gotten a new neighbor right next door to us. It was a middle-aged man with dark brown hair, who we're going to refer to as Dave for the purpose of this story. After about a week of him getting settled in, my mom and I had the weekend all to ourselves. My stepdad had asked for the kids for the weekend for a vacation trip with his new fiancée, and my mom agreed in exchange for the first 3 days of the week. This meant that my mom and I were going to relax and have a little mom-daughter weekend on our time off. Even her boss let her take Saturday off. When she came home Friday night, we had watched a bunch of scary movies in her room. The next morning, we had ordered some breakfast for delivery, and we decided we should make some cookies for the new neighbor. We had just got some of the pre-made cookie dough out of the fridge and let them bake while we got ready. We then put them on a plate and walked over to his house. When we knocked on the door, we had heard a bunch of rustling and movement from inside the house, but nobody came to the door. When my mom knocked again, the door then immediately opened. The familiar man opened the door, and he looked absolutely pissed for no reason. Once he saw us, he seemed to cool down though. So we then introduced ourselves as his neighbors next door, and we welcomed him to the neighborhood. He gave us a piece of paper with his phone number on it, and he told us that we can come over anytime, and although seeming a little creepy, he seemed polite. My mom and I decided to go get our nails done and go get some lunch. As we were getting our pedicures, my mom had brought up our neighbor Dave. She said that he seemed nice, and we talked about him for about a minute or two. I brought up the creepy vibe that I got from him, and my mom said it's probably just first meeting jitters, something that she says often because I often get nervous when meeting new people. After we got our nails done, we decided to go get lunch just a few blocks away. When we were there, we just happened to see our new neighbor Dave there as well. We invited him to eat with us, but he declined very quickly. He just sat across the restaurant from us alone. He kept locking eye contact with me while we were eating, but my mom didn't notice because she had her back turned to him. He kept giving me weird, creepy smiles, but my mom just said I was overreacting. After we had lunch, we decided to go to the mall and get a few new things, as well as a new outfit for my mom's birthday, which was coming up. We had been at the mall for about 2 hours, when once again we had spotted Dave. He crossed over to us when he spotted us, then came to say hi. We had only talked for about a minute, then just continued on with our day. But in every store we went into, I would always see him in the same store, or I'd see him walk by the store we were in. I didn't think too much of it because we were in the same building, and I mean we were bound to see each other, but it low-key seemed like he was following us. My mom needed to go to the bathroom, so I had waited outside on the bench for her. While I was there, Dave came up to me. He had sat next to me, and I said hi, and he asked where my mom was. I told him she was just in the bathroom, but that she was going to be back soon. He was getting really close to me, and he was overall just being really weird and creepy. He was getting kind of touchy, so I stood up and I said I was going to go check on my mom. This is when he grabbed me by my wrist and had pulled me back down on the bench. He then told me no, and that I wasn't going to go anywhere. Just as he did that, My mom came out and asked what was going on. He immediately let go of my wrist and then stood up, then saying nothing with a weird smile and that he was just keeping me company. I had really tried to shake off the bad vibe he gave me, but he was just really creepy. My mom just told me that I shouldn't worry about it and we should just continue on with our day. After that, we went into a Target as well as another thrift store nearby. I didn't see Dave again after that, so I had mostly forgotten all about him and our creepy encounter. My mom and I went to go get dinner at a Chick-fil-A, and by that time it was just at about 9 p.m. and the sun had just barely set. We finally decided to go back home, but we had stopped at a gas station to load up on candy and get snacks. We grabbed a basket and we grabbed all of our favorite things. My mom then sent me up with her card while she went to the bathroom yet again. There was one person in front of me. Just as I was about to pay, I couldn't believe it. I heard Dave's voice, and he was actually behind me in line. He shouted my name and came running over. "Hey, funny seeing you again," Dave said while chuckling. I immediately took a step back because he was getting really close to me, and I could feel his breath on my face. It stunk. The guy at the counter said next, and I quickly turned around with a relief, setting the basket on the counter. I stood there just quietly and awkwardly while the man scanned my stuff. It felt like forever, and I could feel Dave just inching closer behind me. The man gave me my total, and I had reached into my pocket for the wallet. Dave then grabbed my arm yet again, and he gave the man his card, saying don't worry, and he'll cover it. I replied back to him with, "Thank you, but it's okay. I can pay for it." I then grabbed my wallet. Dave continued gripping onto my arm while firmly saying no and that he would pay for it. The man then swiped Dave's card and handed it back, then handing me my bags full of snacks. I started walking towards the door when Dave grabbed my wrist and then turned me around.
"Hey, what are you doing? Where are you going?"
He was right in the middle of saying something when my mom came over and then ripped his hands right off of me. My mom then finally noticed how creepy he was and then went off on him, then saying, "What the hell do you think you're doing touching my daughter like that?" As Dave was trying to explain himself, my mom just totally cut him off, and then we left in a rush. We were walking towards our car when he was yelling out to us. Dave actually had the audacity to say that he deserved some of the snacks since he paid for it, which, keep in mind, I didn't even ask him to do. My mom was confused, and I told her how he gave the cashier his card and wouldn't even let me pay, even though I declined. My mom threw him a candy bar, then told him that we really needed to get the hell out of here. Dave then chuckled and smirked at us in a way that made both of us very uncomfortable. My mom and I got in our car and then finally drove home. We didn't see him the whole rest of the way home, which we kind of expected since, he lives right next door to us now. My mom and I went inside, then changed into some comfy matching PJs, all while double checking to see if our doors were locked. While we were in my mom's room and trying to find a movie to watch, she mentioned Dave and how she felt like he was following us. I agreed, and we both started talking about how he really creeped us out. We eventually forgot all about it, and we were just having a good night, watching a couple of movies until we eventually passed out. I later woke up to a very bright light coming in through the window. When I opened my eyes, I saw a flashlight being shown through the glass door of my mom's room from the outside patio. I got a terrible feeling deep in my gut, and the flashlight moved away. That's when I then heard rattling of the door, as if someone was trying to unlock it without a key. I then shook my mom awake, and I told her, to which she then quickly grabbed her phone to call 911. It was the longest 4 minutes of my life. The police arrived quickly, but they didn't find anyone outside. We eventually went back to sleep a little while later, after our nerves settled slightly and nothing else happened, or any other time for the next week. There was actually no more creepy encounters with the neighbor besides the waving whenever we passed each other, or the casual hi when we would take out our trash. I had finally started to feel a little bit better because I thought it was just a creepy encounter, and I figured we might be able to finally become just normal neighbors to one another. But boy, was I wrong. It was a Monday, and I had just dropped the kids off at their dad's, and I was on my way back home when I noticed I had an empty tank. I pulled over to a nearby gas station about a mile down the road and got out of my car to go pay the cashier. As I'm paying for my gas, I once again see Dave coming into the station. He notices that I'm paying gas, and once again he offers to pay for my stuff. No, it's okay. I can pay for it this time, I tell him. But Dave insisted, and he took my 20 off the counter and then put it back in my pocket. The cashier repeated 50 on pump 3, and I thanked him, then quickly walking outside because I was getting the same creepy vibe from him as before. I put the gas in my car while waiting anxiously. I then saw Dave walk out of the gas station, then to his car on the pump, which was right next to mine. He started up with just normal friendly conversation with me, asking how my mom and I are doing, which I responded politely saying we're well, and also asking how he's doing. As I pulled the gas pump out of my car and put it back, I turned around and I saw that Dave was standing right there. I stepped back a bit while bumping into the trash can. I told him that I really needed to get back home, but he had stopped the car before I could shut it. He didn't even say anything while doing this. He just gave me a weird, creepy smile for what seemed like a really long time. He then told me to have a nice day, before shutting my door and walking away. What the fuck? I thought to myself. I then quickly drove out of the gas station parking lot and headed home. I was going to the store real fast for a couple of things, but I decided to go later because I just didn't feel comfortable going alone at the moment. I was doing my homework when my mom called me. She had called and said that she was going out with a friend, and she asked if it would be okay if she came back in the morning. I know how hard she had been working, so I agreed, even though it did make me a little bit nervous considering my previous encounter with my neighbor. But I decided not to tell her because I wanted her to have a fun time. At this point, nothing unusual had been happening, so I decided to go to bed because I was getting tired. I made sure to lock all the doors, as well as making sure the windows were locked too, and then shortly after, I went to bed. I had just fallen asleep a couple of hours ago, but I had woken up to use the bathroom. When I came back to my room and laid down, I was trying to fall asleep, but I just couldn't. So I turned the other way on my bed, and I decided to turn on the TV. The way that I was facing the TV, I was also facing my window. I had tried watching TV, but it just couldn't catch my attention. And eventually, I was able to fall back asleep. I was about halfway through the movie when I then heard something outside my window. Keep in mind, my window's upstairs, so whatever was outside my window had to be on my roof. I tried to ignore it, just telling myself that it was probably just some animal or the wind. But after a couple of more times of hearing the same sound, as well as the sounds of my roof, my dumb ass decided to check it out. I opened up the blinds, but I didn't see anyone, so I decided it didn't even matter. Then I laid back down, but just as I was falling asleep, I heard a tapping on my window. I tried to ignore it, and I figured it was just an animal, but then it just kept continuing, and I decided to open my blinds. That's when I saw Dave smiling at me through my window. I started screaming and then quickly shut the blinds, calling the police because I just wasn't about to take any damn chances anymore. Plus, he trespassed, so I was pretty sure that that counted for something. In about 6 of the longest minutes of my life, I had heard the police talking to someone outside. Someone knocked on my door, and when I opened it, they were putting Dave into handcuffs. You're not gonna believe this next part. I thanked the police, and the police lady told me that David had a knife and rope and a whole bag full of weapon-like tools. So yeah, I guess Dave was planning to really fuck me up that night. But thank God he was caught. I'm so glad that they arrested him. I ended up calling my mom, letting her know everything that happened thus far, and she came home right away. As I said before, Dave was arrested, but I don't know the full story or how long he was actually in jail for. All I know is that he eventually had to move out, and that's really all I know up to this point. I'm just really glad he's gone, and that my mom and I are safe now. Hey everyone, if you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone. And remember to always stay